I'd been driving for hours and Miller Road wasn't supposed to exist. Not according to the GPS, not according to the folded paper road atlas tucked between my seat and the door. It was one of those county roads in rural Texas that seems to materialize out of heat, shimmer, and exhaustion. Narrow, 2 lanes of cracked asphalt vanishing into mesquite and live oak. The air outside was thick with that dry, sun-cooked smell of cedar and dust, the kind that makes you feel like time's moving slower than your heartbeat. We hadn't planned to stop anywhere that night. Emily and I had talked about pushing on to the state park another 60 miles west, but a storm was building over the horizon, stacking black clouds like bruises. When the first smear of lightning lit up the sky, she glanced at me from the passenger seat and said, "We should find somewhere, anywhere, before it hits." That was when I saw the sign. It was just a sheet of tin nailed to a warped fence post. The letters faded, but still readable. Miller Road, RV Park. The arrow pointed down a side road so narrow it barely looked drivable. No lights, no guardrail, just a stretch of gravel dusted over blacktop, slipping away into the trees. Emily leaned forward, squinting. "There's no way that's on the map." I checked the GPS again. Signal gone. Just a gray grid with our location frozen mid-turn. The little loading wheel spun uselessly. "Maybe it's just a private thing," I said, slowing down. My headlights caught the sign again. The tin was weather-beaten, edges curled, but there was a strange neatness to the lettering, as if someone had repainted it in the last year. We argued about it for maybe 30 seconds, just long enough for the first drops of rain to smack against the windshield in heavy, uneven splats. The road ahead was already turning into a curtain of water. And so, without deciding, I found myself turning the wheel, guiding us off the main road and onto Miller. The trees closed in almost immediately. Branches arched overhead, forming a tunnel that muted the storm. The rain became a dull hiss on the leaves above, and the air smelled like wet bark and something else, something faintly metallic, like rust in a bucket of water. We drove maybe half a mile before we saw the first light. It wasn't a lamp or a floodlight, more like a glow, hazy and golden, diffused through mist. I slowed down, craning forward as the road bent, and then there it was, a cluster of RVs arranged in a loose semicircle around what looked like an old camp office. The sign above the door read simply "Office" in peeling green paint. Every RV I could see was different. Some brand new fifth wheels, some sun-bleached Class Cs with cracked decals, but all of them were perfectly still, their windows dark. There were no porch lights, no campfires, no movement. Just that faint golden glow coming from somewhere I couldn't place. I pulled into the gravel drive, tires crunching loud in the quiet. Emily stared out her window at the nearest rig, a spotless white motorhome with its blinds drawn. "Feels empty," she said softly. The rain had stopped without me noticing. The air was thick, heavy, and still. The office door creaked open before I could knock. A man stepped out, tall, thin, wearing a faded Ranger-style shirt with no name tag. His skin was pale in a way that didn't match the heat. He smiled, wide, fixed, and gestured toward a clipboard on the counter just inside. "Evenin'," he said. His voice was soft, each word spaced like he'd measured it first. "Storm will keep you here tonight. We got spots open." I hesitated. We didn't see this place on the map." His smile didn't falter. "Some things don't need to be on a map, just here when you need them." Something in his tone prickled at the back of my neck, but Emily was already stepping inside to sign the sheet. The pen scratched faintly on the paper. The ranger's eyes stayed on me the whole time, and I realized with a jolt that he hadn't blinked once. We parked in a space near the back, between 2 massive fifth wheels. The gravel under the tires was so white it looked bleached. I cut the engine, and the silence that followed felt unnatural. No cicadas, no wind, not even the faint patter of rain. Inside the RV, Emily moved to the small kitchenette window and peeked out. "They're not doing anything," she murmured. I joined her. The other campers, if that's what they were outside now. I hadn't heard them step out. A man in a blue cap stood perfectly still beside a picnic table. A woman in a floral shirt sat in a lawn chair, hands resting flat on her knees, all facing toward us, and none of them blinked. A crawling cold started in my gut and worked its way up my spine. Maybe they're just weird locals, I tried to say, but my voice sounded thin even to me. We shut the blinds, telling ourselves we were just tired from the drive. But that night, lying in the narrow bed at the back of the RV, I could hear it. Soft, rhythmic tapping. Not rain, not branches, something tapping in threes over and over along the outside wall of our camper. When I finally worked up the nerve to lift the blind and look out, the space between our RV and the next was empty. But the tapping didn't stop. I told myself I wouldn't look again, that if I just lay there long enough, the sound would stop. But the tapping had a patience to it, a persistence that didn't feel human, not hurried, not random. It was deliberate, as though whoever or whatever was making it knew that time was on their side. Emily stirred beside me, half asleep. "Is it still raining?" she whispered. "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "Just go back to sleep." But she sat up, pulling the blanket to her chest. "That's not rain." We listened together now, our breathing shallow, the faint scent of something damp and metallic seeping through the wall. When the tapping stopped abruptly, the silence that followed felt even worse, like the air was holding its breath with us. And then came the scrape. A slow, dragging scrape along the aluminum siding, moving toward the back of the RV. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it, but the look on Emily's face told me she heard it too. I swung my legs over the bed and grabbed the flashlight from the counter. "Stay here," I said. Her hand shot out, gripping my wrist. "Don't." But the thought of lying there, just waiting, was worse. I slipped free and padded toward the door, every step echoing louder in my own ears than it should have. My fingers found the cold latch, and for a moment I just stood there, listening. Nothing. I yanked the door open and swept the flashlight beam outside. Gravel, RVs. The skeletal outline of the camp office through the trees. Nothing moved, no wind, no sound. The beam caught on the side panel of our RV, revealing 3 perfect smudges spaced evenly apart, pale, oval shapes, each with a faint streak below, like condensation where fingertips had pressed and then slid downward. The smell was stronger now, rust and pond water, thick enough to taste. I backed inside and locked the door. Emily was sitting upright in bed, her eyes darting to the blinds. "They're still out there," she whispered. I joined her at the window, lifting the corner of the blind just enough to see. The man in the blue cap was closer now, standing directly across from our space. His face was expressionless, eyes unblinking, his posture stiff like a mannequin. Behind him, others stood scattered among the RVs, every one of them facing in our direction. "Why are they?" Emily started, but stopped when the office light flickered once and went out completely. Darkness swallowed the park. The only light left came from our own RV, and I realized how exposed we were, our little home on wheels glowing like a beacon. I lunged for the switch, plunging us into blackness. My eyes adjusted just enough to make out silhouettes through the blinds, tall, thin, motionless shapes. Emily's hand found mine in the dark. "We can't stay here." I wanted to agree, to fire up the engine and drive out without looking back, but the idea of stepping outside, walking even 3 feet to the driver's seat, felt impossible. That's when we heard it. Not tapping this time, not scraping, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the side door. We froze. Neither of us moved, barely even breathed. Another 3 knocks, louder this time. I swallowed hard. I called, hating the shake in my voice. Silence. Emily whispered, "Don't ask again." But I couldn't help it. "Who's there?" A pause, then a voice, low, too slow, like each word had to be found before it could be spoken. "You are here." The words were wrong, not just in meaning, but in sound. The pitch wavered, like 2 voices speaking almost in sync, one fractionally behind the other. Emily's grip on my hand tightened until my fingers ached. "We need to go, now." I risked one more look through the blinds and saw them all moving at once. The man in the cap, the woman in the floral shirt, shapes from between the RVs, all drifting toward us without breaking eye contact, without blinking. Their movements weren't quick, but they didn't need to be. They moved like people who knew their prey had nowhere to go. My pulse hammered as I slid into the driver's seat, fumbling for the keys. The ignition roared to life, and the sudden noise was like breaking glass in the silence. Headlights cut through the dark, catching pale faces turned toward us. I threw it into gear and gunned the engine. Gravel spat from under the tires. The narrow park road unwound before us, the office flashing past in a blur. But the moment we cleared the front lot, the trees pressed in, and something was wrong. Miller Road didn't look the same. Where the asphalt should have been, there was only dirt, rutted and uneven, flanked by trees that seemed too close together for us to pass. I didn't slow down. Branches slapped the sides of the RV, scraping like fingernails. The headlights caught nothing but endless trunks and undergrowth, the road twisting in ways it hadn't before. And then, impossibly, we broke through the trees, straight back into the gravel lot of the RV park. The office stood in front of us, its single light glowing faintly again, and every one of them was waiting. I slammed the brakes. The RV shuddered to a stop, and for a moment the only sound was the faint ticking of the cooling engine. My mind spun, grasping at some rational thread. Maybe I'd turned too sharply in the dark. Maybe Miller Road looped back on itself without warning. But deep down I knew what I'd seen. That dirt track through the trees had been wrong in a way no county road ever could be. The figures stood where we'd left them, scattered between the office and the ring of RVs, still facing us. Their pale faces caught in our headlights seemed even more drained of color now, almost gray. No movement, no blinking, just that unbroken stare. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. They knew we'd come back. I didn't answer. My hands were trembling on the wheel, and I forced myself to take them off to flex my fingers. I needed to think. Turning around again might only lead us right back here. But staying meant another knock, another scrape in the dark, another night breathing in that metallic rot. The office door opened. The tall man in the ranger shirt stepped out, his posture too straight, his head tilting just enough to make it clear the movement wasn't natural. He didn't step down the porch. He didn't need to. Even from here, I could see the wet glint in his unblinking eyes. I shifted into reverse, but the headlights caught something in the mirror. Two more figures standing directly behind the RV. I hadn't heard them move, hadn't seen them approach. Emily gasped. We're boxed in. The ranger began walking toward us, slow, steady, as though the space between each footfall was measured to draw the moment out as long as possible. Others began to close in too. Men, women, even a boy no older than 12, all in different clothes, all sharing that same stillness, that same dead-eyed focus. I could feel the air in the cab changing, thickening. The smell of rust and pond water was back, but heavier now, carrying something sour underneath. Emily coughed once, covering her mouth with the back of her hand. The ranger stopped at the driver's side window. His lips parted, but the words didn't come right away. He just looked at me, his gaze sliding over my face like he was memorizing every detail. When he finally spoke, it was quiet enough that I almost didn't hear him over the blood pounding in my ears. You signed in. Emily's hand dug into my arm. We didn't put down anything except our first names. His eyes flicked to her, then back to me. You signed in, he repeated, voice firmer now. You stay. A murmur rippled through the others behind him, but it wasn't in English, or maybe it wasn't in words at all. It was a low, breathy sound, like wind moving through reeds, building until it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Something in me broke then. I shoved the gear shift into drive and floored it, aiming not for the road, but for the narrow gap between two of the fifth wheels. The RV lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, mirrors scraping against metal siding as we squeezed through. A hand slapped the side of the rig, leaving a streak of pale residue like damp chalk. We burst past the last row of RVs and into darkness again, bouncing over uneven ground. I didn't care if it wasn't a road anymore. I just needed distance. Branches whipped at the windshield, one snapping against the glass with a crack like a gunshot. Emily was shouting something, pointing ahead, but my focus was on keeping the rig moving. Then the ground dropped. Not much, maybe 2 feet, but enough that the RV slammed down hard, the suspension groaning. When the headlights steadied, they revealed a clearing. And in that clearing, another row of RVs, not the same ones. These were older, rusted through in places, their windows fogged from the inside. They were arranged in the exact same semicircle as before, and standing among them, more figures. But these weren't moving toward us. They stood with their backs to us, facing inward, towards something I couldn't see. Emily's voice was shaking. We're not in the same place. I killed the headlights. We sat there in the dark, the cooling engine popping, straining to hear over our own breathing. There was a sound coming from the center of the clearing, soft at first, then rising. A wet, gurgling rhythm, like someone breathing underwater. One of the figures in the circle twitched. The motion was subtle, but it was enough to make my scalp prickle. Another twitched, then another. Whatever they were looking at or facing was making them move in unison, like puppets pulled by the same string. I eased my foot onto the gas, inching us backward. The gravel crunched softly, and for a moment I thought we might slip away unnoticed. Then every single head turned toward us at once. Even in the darkness, I could see the glint of their eyes. The beam of the headlights was still off, but I could feel their stares like the weight of a spotlight. I didn't wait for Emily to say anything. I jammed the RV into reverse, tires spitting rocks as we lurched backward into the trees. Low branches clawed at the roof and sides, scraping loud enough to drown out the sound of my own heartbeat. Emily clutched the armrest so hard her knuckles went white. You're going the wrong way. There's no right way, I snapped, swerving to avoid a trunk that seemed to appear out of nowhere. We're just getting away. But as I pushed the RV deeper into the woods, I realized the trees were too close together now, the path narrowing until the mirrors brushed bark on both sides. The smell was back, heavy, damp, metallic, clinging to the inside of my throat. Then a light flickered ahead, not bright, more like the glow of a lantern through fog. It bobbed once, then twice before going still. I killed the engine, letting the sudden silence wrap around us. The light didn't move. Emily's whisper was barely audible. That's them. I wanted to disagree, to tell her it was just another camper, maybe someone out looking for help. But deep down I knew she was right. That light wasn't a search, it was bait. The forest around us was too quiet. No wind, no rustle of leaves, no distant hum of insects. Just the faint, wet drip of condensation falling from somewhere above. And then I heard the footsteps. Not rushing. Not creeping, just steady. Each step sank into the damp earth with a soft squelch, drawing closer to the driver's side. I gripped the ignition key, ready to turn it, but something told me not to, like starting the engine now would be an invitation. I kept still, my eyes locked on the narrow strip of glass in the side mirror. A figure emerged from the dark. The ranger. Even without the headlights, I could see the pale gleam of his eyes. His head tilted as he reached out, not toward the door, but toward the window, his fingers pressing against the glass. They left no fingerprints, only faint streaks of that same pale residue. His lips moved, but the sound wasn't words. It was that same wind through reeds murmur, except now it was right against the glass, vibrating through it. Emily was trembling. We have to go. I nodded, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The ranger didn't flinch, didn't step back. He just kept his hand on the window as we surged forward. His palm slid across the glass, leaving a long, chalky smear as we passed him. We plowed through low brush until we hit another dirt path, bumping hard enough that Emily nearly slipped from her seat. The RV groaned with each jolt, and I kept my eyes locked on the dark stretch ahead, refusing to look in the mirrors. But Emily did, and when she spoke, her voice was small and broken. They're following us. I couldn't stop myself from glancing. The headlights caught flashes of pale shapes moving between the trees. Too many to count. They didn't run. They didn't stumble. They just moved, always the same pace, always closing in without ever seeming to hurry. I pressed harder on the gas, but the dirt road began to curve, looping back in a way that made my gut tighten. Trees I swore I'd never seen before now looked familiar, their crooked trunks like marks on a clock face, counting us down. The curve tightened until the road opened again into gravel. We were back at the RV park, but it wasn't the same. The office building was gone, replaced by a dark, open patch of ground. The RVs were still in a semicircle, but every single one had its door open, yawning black toward the center. And in the middle of that empty space, a faint golden glow pulsed, as if breathing. The followers stepped from the tree line and fanned out, forming a wall between us and the way we'd come. I could see their eyes catching the glow, reflecting it like animal eyes in a spotlight. Emily grabbed my arm, her voice breaking. We can't go forward, and we can't go back. The glow pulsed again, stronger this time. And as it did, I felt a pull, not like gravity, but like the air itself was leaning toward it, urging us to follow. My hands tightened on the wheel, and for the first time all night, I didn't know if the fear in my chest was trying to keep me alive or pulling me closer. Then, from somewhere inside the glow, something knocked. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The sound was impossible. It was the same rhythm we'd heard on the side of our RV earlier. 3 steady knocks, but here in the middle of that open gravel, there was nothing to knock on. No wood, no walls, just that golden light pulsing like a heartbeat. Emily's nails dug into my forearm. That's not real. But I couldn't speak. The sound wasn't just in my ears. It was in my chest, my teeth, my bones. Each knock seemed to pull me forward a little more, my foot loosening on the brake without me meaning to. The followers, if that's what they were, began to shift. Not stepping, not walking, but swaying in unison toward the glow, their faces turned to it like sunflowers to the sun. The pale film of their eyes caught the light until they almost seemed to glow themselves. I felt it then, a low vibration under the tires, as if the ground was humming. The air grew warmer, the metallic scent thickening until it tasted like I'd bitten my tongue. Emily's voice snapped me back. Drive! I slammed the gear into reverse, spinning the wheel, trying to carve a path away from the semicircle. But when I turned, the RVs weren't behind us anymore. The way we'd come was blocked by more trees, packed so tightly the branches intertwined like fingers. Where's the road? I shouted. Emily was shaking her head over and over. It's not gone, it's just not here right now. The glow pulsed again, brighter, and the knock came once more. 3 slow beats that made the metal of the RV shiver. This time, the sound wasn't ahead of us. It was all around us. I threw the RV into drive, steering straight toward the line of followers. I didn't think, didn't plan, just aimed for the gap between 2 of them and floored it. The engine roared, the gravel screamed under the tires, and we shot forward. They didn't move out of the way. They didn't need to, because just before we reached them, the gap I was aiming for stretched, pulled wider, like the air itself was making space for us. The RV slid through, and as we passed, I saw their faces clearly for the first time. Their skin wasn't pale, it was translucent. Veins and tendons swam under the surface like faint blue threads. Their eyes didn't just fail to blink, they didn't have eyelids at all. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself to focus ahead, but Emily's scream pulled my eyes to the side window. The ranger was running alongside us now, his feet silent on the gravel, his movements too smooth for how fast we were going. He kept pace easily, his head turning to keep me in his gaze. His mouth moved, but the glass between us seemed to warp the sound into a wet, garbled whisper. You signed in. You stay. The trees broke suddenly, and we were back on Miller Road, or what I thought was Miller Road. The pavement was cracked and mossy. The center line faded almost to nothing. The RV rattled as I pushed it faster, desperate to outrun whatever this was. But something wasn't right. The road wasn't leading back to the main highway. It dipped, twisted, and curved in ways it never had before, the trees bending over us until they formed a tunnel of green shadow. The light outside dimmed as though evening had fallen in seconds. The smell of pond water returned, stronger than ever, and ahead I could hear it, a faint sloshing like waves against a dock. Emily's voice was tight. "Do you hear that?" I nodded. "Water." We rounded a bend and nearly skidded into it. The road ended abruptly at the edge of a black, still lake. The surface reflected nothing. Not the trees, not the sky, not us. It was as if the water wasn't water at all, but a hole punched straight into the ground. I hit the brakes hard, the RV shuddering to a stop. The followers stood along the tree line behind us, shoulder to shoulder. The glow was gone. All that remained was the silence. Then something in the lake knocked. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The surface rippled outward, and the black water began to move toward us. Not lapping, not flowing, crawling. It moved like nothing liquid should, thick and deliberate, folding over itself in slow waves that never broke. The sound wasn't the soft lap of water, but a wet dragging, like something heavy being pulled along the bottom. Each knock came again, muffled now, as though the lake was breathing under its own skin. Emily's hand clamped onto my shoulder. "Go! Just go!" I spun the wheel and floored it, sending the RV into a hard turn that nearly tipped us. Gravel spat from under the tires as we aimed back toward the tree line. But the way we'd come was gone. Where the road should have been, there was only more of that black water, stretching between the trees like a vein. I slammed the brakes. "It's cutting us off." She was looking past me now, her face draining of what little color was left. "They're not behind us anymore." I turned. The followers were gone. Every last one of them. The tree line was empty, still as a photograph. For a moment, the only sound was the low churn of the lake inching closer to the front bumper. Then, from somewhere deep in the trees, I heard the murmur. That same reed-like whisper, only louder now, as if the forest itself was speaking. The branches began to sway, not in wind, but in rhythm. The movement was small at first, a slow tilt and return, but it grew with each knock from the water, until the whole tree line seemed to be bowing toward us. And then they stepped out, not from the direction of the park, not from the path we'd taken. They came from all sides at once, emerging between the trunks like shadows peeled from the dark. The ranger was at their front, his shirt hanging loose over a frame that seemed taller now, stretched somehow. His eyes never left mine. Emily's voice broke. "We can't outrun them." I shook my head, scanning for any gap, any break in the wall of pale figures now encircling the lake's edge. But they weren't closing in, not yet. They just stood there watching as the black water crawled another foot forward. The ranger raised one hand and pointed, not at me, not at the RV, but at the lake. I shook my head, mouthing no, but his expression didn't change. He spoke, and though his lips moved only slightly, I heard the words as if they were whispered directly into my ear. "You signed in. You stay." Emily grabbed the gear shift. "If we hit them, they'll move." I finished for her, though I didn't believe it. I shoved the RV into drive and floored it, aiming straight at the narrowest part of the ring. The followers didn't shift until the very last second, parting just enough for us to squeeze through without touching them. The relief lasted only a moment. Because as soon as we cleared the ring, the trees closed in so tight that the mirrors brushed bark again, and I realized the road was leading us downhill. The smell of the lake was stronger now, clinging to my skin, my clothes, my breath. We burst from the tunnel of trees into another clearing, and my stomach turned. We were back at the RV park, only it wasn't a park anymore. The ground was wet, slick like river mud, and the RVs were sinking into it, tilting at unnatural angles. Doors hung open, their steps submerged in black water that wasn't supposed to be there. The golden glow was gone. The office was gone. The followers stood knee-deep in the water, unmoving. The ranger was among them, but this time he wasn't watching me. He was looking at the center of the flooded lot. Something was rising there. At first, it looked like the roof of a submerged building breaking the surface, but as more of it emerged, I saw the curve of a skull, the ridged arch of something that might have been a spine, and then 2 long finger-like shapes reaching upward, dripping black. The knocks came again, but they were no longer separate beats. They rolled into each other, faster, louder, until the sound was a steady pounding that rattled the steering column. Emily's scream cut through it. "It's coming here!" The water surged toward us, a tide without wind or moon, carrying that thing with it, slow but unstoppable. And as the surface broke around it, I realized it wasn't rising from the lake. It was crawling out. It didn't crawl like an animal. Its movements were too precise, too heavy, as if each limb knew exactly where it wanted to land. The long, finger-like appendages pressed into the mud with a sound like wet cloth tearing, and when it pulled itself forward, the entire surface of the water shifted, bending toward it as if it were the center of gravity. The followers didn't move, not even when the thing passed between them. Their faces remained fixed forward, eyes glassy, water lapping against their torsos. Emily had her hands braced against the dash. "Go!" she yelled. I threw the RV into reverse, slamming the pedal down. The tires spun in the slick mud, throwing arcs of black water behind us. The rear wheels caught, and we lurched backward toward the tree line, but just before we hit the edge, the ranger stepped into our path. I had maybe 3 seconds to react. I swerved, missing him by inches, and clipped the corner of a half-submerged picnic table. The RV jolted violently, a sound of splintering wood mixing with the wet pound of the thing moving toward us. When I looked up, it was closer. So close, I could see its surface wasn't skin at all, but a thin, stretched membrane holding something beneath. Shapes moved under it, pressing outward for a fraction of a second before sinking back into the dark fluid inside. Emily covered her mouth. "It's full of them." The ranger began walking toward my door, each step sinking him deeper into the black water, but never slowing him down. His gaze was locked on mine. Behind him, the thing shifted course, angling toward the RV like it understood where we were trying to go. I slammed us into drive and aimed for the thinnest part of the tree line, pushing the RV harder than I'd ever dared before. Branches scraped and snapped along the sides, one catching and tearing the passenger side mirror clean off. Emily ducked, shielding her face as splinters rained across the glass. We burst through into another stretch of road, but it wasn't Miller Road anymore. The pavement was cracked, half swallowed by roots. The air was darker, cooler, carrying the scent of wet ash. The trees leaned in over the road, their limbs interlocking like ribs. Emily whispered, "We're not getting out of here, are we?" I didn't answer. I just kept my foot on the gas, watching the way ahead twist and wind until it felt like we were driving inside a knot. Every curve led into another. Every dip bled into another rise. And then, without warning, the road straightened. I saw it far ahead, an opening, light spilling through the trees, and beyond that what looked like the edge of a highway. A real one. I pushed harder. The RV groaned, rattling, but it held. Emily leaned forward, her hand gripping the dash. "Don't slow down." We were almost there when something slammed into the side of the RV. The impact was so strong it shoved us halfway into the opposite lane. I wrestled with the wheel, trying to correct, but the weight shifted again. Another blow, this time from the other side. I caught a flash of pale through the window. The followers were running alongside us now, their feet silent on the cracked pavement, their movements too smooth, too fast. Their faces were twisted, not in anger, but in something worse. Hunger. One of them, small, wiry, its jaw hanging slightly open, jumped, slamming both hands against the passenger window. The glass bowed inward, but didn't break, leaving 2 perfect, pale smudges behind. Emily screamed, kicking at the glass from inside. I gritted my teeth and drove straight toward the opening, the followers closing in from both sides. My chest was tight, the smell of rust and stagnant water choking the air. And then I saw him. The ranger stood in the middle of the road just before the opening. His arms hung loosely at his sides, but his head was tilted up toward the sky as if he were listening for something far away. At the last moment, he lowered his gaze to me, and he smiled. I didn't swerve. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles locked, the highway's open stretch just beyond him like a mirage I might never reach. The ranger didn't move. He stood there in that loose, off-kilter posture, as if the bones beneath his skin weren't quite set right. Emily's voice was hoarse. Hit him. The tires screamed as I pressed harder, the RV barreling forward. For a heartbeat, it felt certain. Metal against flesh, unstoppable force against whatever he was. But when we reached him, there was no impact. He was simply inside. One blink, he'd been in front of us. The next, he was standing in the aisle between the driver's seat and the kitchenette, water dripping from his sleeves onto the vinyl floor. The smell hit first, thick, wet rot, like pond muck dragged into an enclosed space. Emily let out a strangled noise and pressed herself against the passenger door. I swerved instinctively, the RV lurching onto the shoulder, tires spitting gravel. The ranger didn't even steady himself. He just stood there, his gaze sliding from me, Emily, then back again. "You signed in," he said, but this time the words were faster, sharper, his voice layered with a dozen whispers, all slightly out of sync. "You stay." I reached for the door latch, intending to throw him out onto the road, but my hand froze halfway there. My fingers wouldn't close, like my own body had decided it wasn't worth the attempt. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the pull of something inside the sound of his voice. Emily's scream snapped me back. She was trying to climb over the dashboard, her eyes fixed on the windshield. The highway was gone. We weren't on any road at all now. The RV sat on a flat expanse of black water stretching in every direction, the horizon swallowed in fog. There was no reflection beneath us, just a shifting darkness, like we were floating on the skin of something alive. The ranger turned to face the front of the RV. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped toward the windshield and pressed his palm against it. The glass didn't fog, but the surface rippled outward, like his hand had touched a pond. Emily was sobbing now. "Stop him. Please." I lunged, grabbing his arm. My hand closed on something that wasn't skin. It was too smooth, too cold, with a subtle give beneath the surface, like pressing into the side of a water balloon. My stomach lurched at the faint movement I felt inside it. He turned his head toward me and blinked. Only it wasn't a normal blink. His entire eye slid sideways under the surface, revealing something darker, glistening beneath, before sliding back into place. The black water beneath us shifted. Something huge was moving below, its shadow passing directly under the RV, blocking out the dim glow that seemed to come from somewhere beneath. The ranger leaned closer to me, his breath cold despite the humid air. "It's already here." The floor trembled, not from an impact, but from a slow, heavy lift, as if the RV was being pushed upward from underneath. Emily clung to the dashboard, staring through the windshield at something I couldn't see yet. Then I heard it. 3 deliberate knocks, this time from below. The surface broke. A shape rose from the water, tall enough to block the horizon. Its form was wrong, made of curves and bends that didn't belong in the same body. Its wet skin stretched taut over shifting masses underneath. Holes opened and closed across its surface, some like gills, some like mouths, and from each came that same reed-like murmur, now so loud it vibrated the air. Emily's voice was a thin thread. "That's what they're feeding." The ranger stepped back, letting the thing's shadow fall completely over us. The water around the RV began to churn, drawing us forward, inch by inch, toward the largest of those openings. And somewhere inside it, I swore I saw another RV, its windows dark, its shape tilted in the current, sinking slowly into the dark. The sound froze me. 3 knocks from the water ahead. 3 knocks from somewhere inside our RV. Emily's scream tore me back into motion. Her leg jerked as the thing in the water tightened its grip, pulling her another few inches out of the window. I lunged, grabbing her around the waist. Her skin was slick and cold where the thing's grip had touched, as if the heat had been pulled straight from her body. The knocks came again, closer now, from behind us. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The bathroom door was closed. I was certain I hadn't shut it. A faint ripple of light, not from our lamps, but from somewhere wrong, pulsed underneath it, spreading across the floor in thin, worm-like veins. The ranger hadn't moved. He stood in the middle of the aisle, smiling that stretched smile, head tilted toward the door. "Another spot. Opened up," he murmured. Emily thrashed in my grip. "It's pulling harder!" Her voice was high, nearly breaking. I planted my foot against the cabinet, leaned back, and yanked with everything I had. The thing outside gave, not because I was stronger, but because it wanted to. I could feel it in the way its grip loosened all at once, smooth and deliberate, letting her fall backward into the RV. She hit the floor, gasping, clawing at her leg. The skin where it had touched her was mottled, faint blue veins radiating from the spot like frost spreading across glass. Before I could pull the window shut, something else rose in the water beside us. Not a hand this time. A face, if you could call it that. It had the proportions of a human head, but none of the structure, just a smooth dome beneath a thin, translucent membrane. Dark shapes moved inside it, pressing outward, then slipping away. 2 pits opened where eyes should have been, not empty, but filled with the same black water as the lake. They rippled when they fixed on me. The bathroom door knocked again. 3 times, louder. Emily scrambled to her feet, eyes darting between the door and the window. Don't open it, I said, sharper than I meant. The ranger finally moved. He stepped closer to the bathroom door and placed his hand flat against it. The knocking stopped instantly. He looked over his shoulder at me, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "You don't need to be afraid. You've been here before." My throat went dry. "No, I haven't." His smile widened until the skin at the corners of his mouth creased unnaturally. "Haven't you?" The floor beneath us shuddered. The current was moving again, dragging us closer to the pulsing opening in the water. The pale, suspended figures inside were shifting now, some turning toward us. Their mouths opened in perfect unison. The murmur rose, not from the water, but from inside the RV. The walls vibrated with it, every surface trembling like something was trying to speak through them. Emily clutched my arm. "Do you hear?" The windows went black, not dark. Black like something had pressed up against them from the outside, sealing out the world. The only light left came from the thin worm-like veins of pale glow creeping from under the bathroom door. The ranger stepped aside. "You should answer." The knocking started again. 3 perfect, deliberate knocks. And this time, they came from the other side of the bathroom door and the floor beneath our feet. The knocks vibrated through the floor, the sound deep enough to rattle my teeth. Emily shook her head hard, stepping back from the door like just being near it would let something through. The ranger didn't move. He just waited, his hands loose at his sides, his head tilted in that patient, listening way that made me feel like we were the only ones who didn't understand what was about to happen. The pale glow under the door thickened, veins branching farther into the aisle, creeping toward my boots. Where they touched, the floor seemed to soften, not sag, but lose its solidity, like it was turning to damp earth. Emily's voice cracked. "If you open that door, we're dead." I wanted to agree. But the air in the RV had shifted, heavy now, pressing into my ears like we were sinking underwater. The thing outside was still there. I could feel its bulk in the water around us, the slow shift of weight as it circled. The window glass flexed faintly in and out with every movement, like it was breathing. The knocks came again. Louder. Faster. This time they didn't stop at 3. They kept going, a steady, deliberate rhythm that matched my pulse until I couldn't tell which was which. And then, silence. The ranger straightened. Now. The handle turned on its own. The door swung open, and the glow poured into the cabin. It wasn't light, not really. More like a visibility that replaced shadows with detail I didn't want to see. Beyond the doorway wasn't the tiny RV bathroom anymore. It was a tunnel. The walls glistened like the inside of something living, slick with a dark sheen, faint ripples moving under the surface. The floor was shallow black water, perfectly still. Far down the passage, a shape shifted, a silhouette that might have been human if the proportions weren't wrong. Emily backed into me, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "Shut it! Shut it now!" I reached for the handle, but my fingers met only that soft give, like pressing into water contained by skin. It pulsed faintly under my grip. The ranger stepped into the doorway. "She's waiting," he said softly, nodding toward the silhouette in the tunnel. "She?" Emily's voice was just a whisper, but the thing inside the tunnel reacted. The figure tilted its head, the movement sharp, too precise. Then it began to walk toward us, the water rippling outward with each step. I could see more of it now, hair floating just above the surface, limbs too long, each step bending the knees the wrong way. Its face was obscured, as though the water itself clung to it. The RV shifted under us, a slow, sinking tilt. The windows darkened further, and somewhere below, the three knocks started again, slower this time, deeper, as if the source had grown. The figure reached the threshold. Its face lifted toward mine, and the water slid away from its features. It was Emily. Not the Emily in front of me. This one was colder, her skin the same translucent pallor as the followers, her eyes wide and lidless. She raised one hand, palm out, as if asking for help. But her lips moved in perfect sync with the knocks from below. The real Emily was trembling so violently I could feel it through my arm. That's not me. That's not me. The doppelganger leaned forward until its face was inches from mine. When it spoke, its voice was layered. Emily's voice over the rangers, over the reed murmur of the lake. You signed in. And then it smiled, showing a mouthful of water. The smile widened, and the water in its mouth didn't spill. It stayed there, held in place like it belonged to something deeper than gravity. I staggered back, dragging the real Emily with me, but the other Emily stepped forward, crossing the threshold without lifting her feet. The black water from the tunnel spread across the RV floor in a perfect sheet, swallowing the glow until the aisle was nothing but slick darkness. The ranger didn't stop her. He stepped aside, bowing his head slightly as though welcoming someone home. The doppelganger's eyes never blinked. It moved closer, one pale, webbed hand reaching toward my chest. I could see the veins under its skin, not red or blue, but a slow, pulsing green, like moss lit from within. The smell that came off it was a blend of stagnant water and something faintly sweet, rot gone too far just before it turns to dust. The real Emily's nails dug into my arm. Don't let it touch you. The knocks came again, 3 sharp strikes, now from every direction at once. The floor, the walls, even the ceiling trembled with the sound. The water on the floor rippled in perfect rings, and in those ripples I saw shapes, faces just beneath the surface, all with the same wide, unblinking eyes. The doppelganger tilted its head toward the sound, then back to me. It spoke without moving its lips, the words vibrating through the water under our feet. You came back. I shook my head, my throat tightening. I've never been here. Its mouth curved slightly, as if humoring a lie. You always come back. It stepped closer, so close the cold coming off it seeped through my shirt. My hand went instinctively to the gear shift, but when I tried to push it forward, it wouldn't move, frozen in place as if the whole RV had locked itself. The ranger finally spoke. The road brings you. The water keeps you. The faces in the floor rippled outward, ahead, forming a loose circle beneath the doppelganger. One by one, they opened their mouths and thin streams of water rose from them, not splashing, not spilling, but lifting in smooth, twisting strands that hung in the air. They began to weave together, forming a slow spiral between us and the doorway. Emily's voice cracked beside me. What happens if it touches us? I didn't answer, because I knew the answer was already in those faces, silent, unmoving, preserved in a way that wasn't life. The spiral of water reached toward me. I stepped back, dragging Emily, but the aisle was narrowing. The windows on both sides of the RV bulged inward, as if the dark outside was pressing against them, testing their strength. The doppelganger's lips moved again, and this time the voice was mine, my exact tone, my exact rhythm, coming from somewhere deep in the water. You signed in. It lunged. I shoved Emily toward the passenger seat, throwing my shoulder into the thing's chest. It was like hitting a thick tarp stretched over water. The surface gave, but something inside pushed back hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. Cold seeped into me where we connected, spreading fast through my arms. I broke away and grabbed the ignition. The key turned, but the engine didn't roar. It groaned, a deep, wet sound, as if it were filling with the same water beneath our feet. The spiral collapsed, slamming down onto the floor with a splash that didn't fade. It just stayed there, suspended in ripples that didn't move outward. The faces in the water opened their mouths again. 3 slow knocks. From underneath the RV, the whole floor began to sink. The sinking wasn't sudden. It was slow, deliberate, like whatever was beneath us wanted us to feel every inch we were being pulled down. The RV groaned under the shift, a low metallic protest that made my teeth ache. Emily clung to the passenger seat, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "We have to get out, now!" The doppelganger stood between us and the open doorway, its feet submerged in the black water that had replaced the floor. The ripples around its legs were moving the wrong way, pulling inward toward it instead of outward. The ranger remained motionless in the aisle, the faint tilt of his head suggesting he was listening to something far below. His eyes were fixed on me, glassy but intent. "You're making it harder," he said, almost gently. I didn't answer. My mind was racing, scanning for anything that wasn't just another trap. My gaze landed on the driver's window, a small pane above the wheel. Not big enough for both of us at once, but maybe big enough to squeeze through if it was the only choice left. The sinking deepened. Water lapped at my boots now, colder than ice and thick enough that each step was a drag. My legs ached instantly. The doppelganger moved. Not toward me, toward Emily. Its motion was smooth, silent, like it was being pulled forward by a string. She backed away until her shoulders hit the dash, eyes wide. "Stay away from her," I shouted, slamming my shoulder into its side. This time I didn't just bounce off, it gave way like wet paper, collapsing inward before reforming. The cold it left clung to my skin, crawling up my arms like frostbite. The ranger finally took a step forward, his boots vanishing into the water without a sound. "She can't leave without you, and you can't leave without her." The faces under the surface were closer now, directly beneath us, their features warped by the shifting water. Their mouths were moving, not knocking this time, but speaking. I couldn't hear the words over the deep hum rising from below, but I could feel them vibrating in my chest. Emily's hand shot out, gripping mine. "The window, go!" I turned, shoving the latch upward with my free hand. The frame resisted, swollen with moisture, but I forced it open. Cold air poured in, real air, not the heavy, wet breath of the lake. For the first time since the sinking started, I saw something beyond the black water. Trees. Not the same trees as before. These were spaced far apart, their bark pale and peeling in strips. The ground between them was dry, cracked, like it hadn't seen rain in years. I boosted Emily toward the opening, but the moment her torso cleared it, the water surged. The doppelganger's hand shot out, gripping her ankle. Emily screamed, kicking wildly. I grabbed her leg and pulled, feeling the muscles strain under my grip. The doppelganger's fingers didn't squeeze. They seeped, like they were melting into her skin. Her cry turned into a sob, her hands scrabbling at the dirt outside the window. The ranger's voice was calm. "She's almost one of us already. Let her go." I roared and yanked harder. The fingers broke apart, not pulled free, but dissolving into water that splashed back onto the floor. Emily tumbled out of the window with a grunt, lap hitting the dry ground outside. The RV shuddered violently. The water surged higher, past my knees now, and the faces beneath the surface began to rise, their eyes locking on me. The ranger stepped closer, the water lapping at his chest without soaking the fabric of his shirt. "You can still sign out," he said softly, "but you won't." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I threw myself at the window, shoving my shoulders through, twisting until I fell hard onto the cracked earth beside Emily. We scrambled to our feet, backing away. Behind us, the RV continued to sink until only the roof was visible. The ranger stood atop it now, the doppelganger beside him. Both watched us without moving. And then the knocks came again, 3 slow, deliberate strikes, this time from under the dry ground where we stood. The first knock was faint, just a dull vibration through the soles of my boots. The second was stronger, enough to rattle the brittle dirt around my feet. By the third, the ground flexed, actually flexed, like something under the cracked surface was pressing upward. Emily grabbed my arm, her voice breaking. It's underneath us. We bolted, stumbling across the uneven earth toward the pale-barked trees. They weren't far, maybe 30 yards, but each step felt slower, heavier, like the air itself was pulling against us. The smell of stagnant water followed, too thick to be carried by any wind. Behind us, the RV disappeared completely beneath the black water. The ranger and the doppelganger didn't sync with it. They simply faded, as though they'd never been standing there. The surface stilled, but the knocks didn't stop. They chased us through the ground, a steady pulse keeping pace with our sprint. We hit the tree line, weaving between the peeling trunks. The world beyond them looked brighter somehow, as if the sky was bleeding back into the right color, but the pale ground still cracked under each footfall, still trembled with each knock from below. I didn't realize we'd stopped until I saw why Emily had frozen. Ahead, between two leaning trees, was a sign. A thin sheet of tin nailed to a warped post. The paint was faded, but I could still read it. Miller Road, RV Park. My stomach flipped. No, this is. The knocks grew louder, faster, until they merged into a continuous rumble beneath us. The cracks in the earth widened, revealing thin seams of black water below, and from them came that same reed-like murmur that had haunted us all night. Emily backed away from the sign, her hands shaking. We never left. The ground shifted again, and one of the seams split open entirely. Something pale and jointless pushed through, a long, finger-like limb, followed by another. The dirt crumbled around it, falling away into the darkness below. I grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her toward the gap in the trees, forcing us through the space between the trunks. The light ahead grew stronger with every step until it was almost blinding, the knocks fading behind us, swallowed by distance. And then we were on asphalt. Real asphalt. Warm from the sun, solid underfoot. A 2-lane county road stretching in both directions, no sign of water, no smell of rust. Emily turned in a slow circle, scanning for the sign, but the post was gone. So was the tree line. Miller Road wasn't there at all. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up instantly. Full bars, GPS spinning back to life. We were miles from where we'd turned off the highway, standing in the middle of nowhere with nothing but empty road behind us. Emily was crying quietly, her voice hoarse. We're not going back, right? Ever? I shook my head. No, even if we tried. I don't think we could find it again. She wiped at her face, staring down the road. But what if it finds us? I didn't answer, because in the silence between us I thought I heard it again, faint, almost lost under the hum of the warm wind. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Under a sky so wide it seemed to pull at the edges of the earth, I drove my old Class C RV down a 2-lane ribbon of cracked asphalt that cut through the high desert like a scar. The road was empty in every direction, except for the heat ripples that made distant hills waver like ghosts rising out of the sand. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, not because the drive was dangerous, but because this was the kind of land where silence carried weight, where even the wind seemed to watch you. I'd been on the road for weeks by then, chasing a personal obsession I couldn't really explain to most people. Abandoned ghost towns. Places once alive with voices, commerce, and community, now left to decay under an open sky. Some people collect postcards, others chase mountain peaks. Me? I wanted to see where America's breath had stopped. I wanted to stand in the shadows of buildings whose walls still remembered things no one had spoken aloud in decades. That particular August afternoon, I was headed toward a town called Providence Flats. It didn't show up on GPS. Not really. Just a pale smudge of old grid lines if you zoomed way in on satellite view. I'd read about it in an online forum for amateur historians, buried between discussions of mining rights and property disputes. No official write-up, no tourist brochures, just a single line. Providence Flats is still out there. Don't go at night. The warning should have been enough to keep me away. Instead, it hooked me. By the time I saw the first leaning fence post, the sun was already hanging low, its light stretched thin and coppery across the horizon. The RV's tires crunched over gravel as I eased onto what had once been the town's main street. The place was barely more than a dozen buildings, false-fronted wooden shells, a single church with no glass in the windows, and a scattering of rusted machinery sinking into the dust. Not a soul in sight, not even the sound of insects. That silence, I'd heard people describe it before, but it's something you have to feel in your bones to really understand. In most places, silence is layered. There's always a faint hum of life, a bird somewhere, a breeze through grass. Here, it was complete, like the earth had turned off its own breathing. I parked just off the main drag and killed the engine. The sudden absence of the RV's rumble made the stillness heavier. I stepped outside, boots sinking slightly into the powdery dirt, and felt an odd coolness in the air, despite the lingering daylight. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. This part of Nevada should have been holding on to its heat well into the night, but the air bit faintly at my arms like it was already midnight. As I walked between the buildings, I couldn't shake the sensation of being observed. Not watched in the way you feel when someone's standing behind you, but as though the place itself was aware I was there. Like the tilted porches and broken windows were leaning in just a little more than they had a moment ago. The old general store was still standing, its door hanging from one hinge, the faded lettering above the entrance barely legible. I stepped inside, expecting dust, rot, maybe the faint scent of old wood. What hit me instead was sweetness. Not fresh, pleasant sweetness, but something wrong, like fruit left out too long or flowers left to die in stagnant water. The smell clung to the back of my throat, making me swallow hard. I scanned the room. Shelves still lined the walls, like some holding tin cans with labels so faded they looked like watercolor paintings left in the rain. The counter was warped, the cash register gutted long ago. But it was what lay in the middle of the floor that made my chest tighten. A small pile of rocks. Perfectly round river stones, stacked 3 high, no bigger than my fist. At first, I thought maybe kids had been here recently, playing at some kind of game. But there were no footprints in the dust, only my own trailing in from the door. I crouched down, studying the stones, and noticed something carved into the top one. It wasn't a letter. Not in any alphabet I recognized. Just a series of jagged lines that met in the middle, almost like a starburst or an insect with too many legs. My instinct said, "Don't touch it." I touched it anyway. The second my fingers brushed that stone, the air shifted. I didn't hear anything, not exactly, but there was this low, pressure-like thrum in my ears, like when you're deep underwater and can feel the weight of it pressing in. My heart kicked up, and I stood so fast my knees popped. I told myself I'd been holding my breath, that I was just lightheaded from the stale air. But that wasn't the truth. Something in that store had changed the moment I touched the stone. I backed out, keeping my eyes on the pile until the sunlight hit my face again. The coolness I'd felt earlier was sharper now, carrying with it the faintest sound. Footsteps, not hurried, not close, just slow, measured steps somewhere down the street. I spun around, scanning the row of buildings, but saw nothing. My hands were trembling, though I tried to tell myself it was adrenaline from being somewhere so isolated. I was alone, completely alone. Still, I didn't like turning my back to those sounds, so I started toward the RV. My boots scuffed against the dirt in a rhythm I knew, but underneath it, yes, there was that other rhythm, just a beat behind mine. By the time I reached the RV door, the sound had stopped. My pulse was hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. I climbed inside, locked the door, and sat behind the wheel with my hands still gripping it, staring straight ahead. The sun was almost gone now, and long shadows stretched across the road, swallowing half the town in darkness. I told myself I'd wait until full dark, then leave. Something about driving out with the last light felt like tempting fate, like running from something you hadn't yet seen. But as night truly fell, the air inside the RV grew colder. And then came the knocking. Not on the door, on the side of the RV. 3 sharp taps, spaced evenly apart. I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe, my eyes flicking to the side window. Nothing. just the empty street. My mind scrambled for explanations, a bird, a branch in the wind, but there was no wind and no trees anywhere near enough to touch the RV. The knocks came again, this time from the opposite side. My first thought was that someone was circling the RV, testing it, moving from one side to the other in the shadows. My second thought, the one I didn't want to acknowledge, was that there shouldn't be anyone here at all. The nearest paved road was 15 miles back, and I'd seen no sign of other vehicles since I'd turned off. I stayed perfectly still, my breath shallow, ears straining for even the smallest giveaway, a scuff in the dirt, a whisper of clothing. Nothing. Just that stillness pressing in again, thick and unmoving. I reached for the small mag light I kept in the cup holder, gripping it like a weapon more than a flashlight, and slid from the driver's seat to the narrow aisle between the front seats and the kitchenette. Every creak of the RV's frame sounded too loud. My shoulder brushed against the curtain uncovering the passenger side window, and for one reckless moment, I pulled it aside. Pitch black. The beam from my flashlight barely cut through it, the light swallowed by the emptiness beyond the glass. No movement, no shape, no reflective gleam of eyes. I told myself I was going to check the other side, just to be sure, but the truth was, I had to check. If I didn't, my mind would fill the void with something worse than whatever was actually there. I eased toward the rear of the RV, each step careful. The knocking hadn't returned, but the air inside was colder still, enough that goosebumps prickled my arms. My breath fogged faintly in the beam of the flashlight, and that was wrong, dead wrong for August in Nevada. When I reached the back window, I hesitated, my fingers on the curtain. I pulled it back in a slow, steady motion. At first, I thought the glass was fogged from the outside, but as I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't condensation. It was frost. A delicate layer of ice crystals had spread across the surface, catching the light in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Lines crossing, intersecting, curling in on themselves until they formed something eerily familiar. The same jagged, starburst-like symbol carved into that stone in the general store. My heart slammed once hard against my ribs. I stepped back so fast I hit the counter behind me, sending a spoon clattering to the floor. The sound rang in the small space like a gunshot. That's when the third knock came. Not from either side, from directly beneath me. 3 deliberate thuds, spaced the same way as before. It felt like they traveled up through the floor into my legs. I jumped back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My first instinct was to start the engine and get the hell out of Providence Flats, but that meant stepping toward the driver's seat, toward the sound. I don't know what made me do it. Stubbornness, maybe, or just the raw refusal to feel hunted. But I crouched down, shining the beam into the narrow gap where the RV's floor met the cabinets. There was nothing to see, only shadows and the faint gleam of metal from the frame. Still, my skin crawled as if something was pressed flat against the underside, listening. That was enough. I lurched to my feet, turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I didn't care about tempting fate anymore. I was getting out. I threw it into drive, tires spinning for a second on the loose dirt before catching. The main street unrolled in my headlights, the old buildings looming like a lineup of hollowed faces. I kept my eyes forward, my grip white-knuckled on the wheel. But in the corner of my vision, I caught movement. In one of the second-story windows of the hotel, just for a moment, a figure. Pale. Still. Watching. I told myself not to look, but my eyes flicked up anyway, just in time to see it tilt its head in a way that made my stomach knot. Then it was gone. The road out was darker than I remembered, the RV's headlights catching on nothing but dust. My pulse stayed high until the town was well behind me, swallowed by the black desert night. Even then, the feeling didn't fade. Miles later, when I finally pulled over at a truck stop to breathe and collect myself, I found something waiting for me. Right there, on the counter by the sink, sat 3 perfectly round river stones, stacked neatly, the top one carved with that same symbol. I hadn't heard anyone enter. I hadn't stopped long enough for anyone to plant them, and the dust around the sink was undisturbed, except for where those stones rested, as if they'd always been there. I stared at them for a long time, my hands refusing to touch them again. I knew deep down what it meant. Providence Flats wasn't done with me, and maybe it never would be. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. Sure, parked in the farthest corner of the truck stop lot, blinds drawn, the faint hum of diesel engines from other rigs acting like a weak lullaby. But my eyes kept snapping open at every shift in shadow. Every creak of the RV felt deliberate. The worst part wasn't the possibility that someone was out there. It was the gnawing certainty that whatever had followed me from Providence Flats didn't need to be. By dawn, I'd made up my mind to keep moving. If I kept the wheels turning, maybe it couldn't catch up. Or maybe that was just a lie I told myself so I wouldn't feel trapped in my own vehicle. I didn't even stop for breakfast, just poured burnt gas station coffee into a travel mug and merged back onto the highway. The next ghost town on my list wasn't far, relatively speaking, about 160 miles east, a place called Jericho Wells. It had been a stagecoach stop in the 1880s, then a mining camp, then, like so many others, left to the sand and wind. I told myself I wasn't going there for the thrill this time. I told myself I was going to prove something, though I couldn't put into words exactly what. Maybe that I could still control this trip, that I wasn't just being dragged along by whatever had started in Providence Flats. By mid-morning, the sun was already climbing high and the desert shimmered with heat. But inside the RV, I felt that same faint chill from the night before. Not enough to fog my breath now, but enough to keep my shoulders hunched. I kept glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting to see those 3 stacked stones sitting there. They weren't. What was there, though, was something I couldn't explain. A faint smear of dust across the seat upholstery, shaped almost like a handprint. I told myself it must have been there before, that I'd just never noticed. I cranked the music louder to drown out the thudding in my chest and kept driving. Jericho Wells appeared as a pale smudge on the horizon, a handful of low structures surrounded by crumbling corrals, the skeletal remains of a windmill twisting in the breeze. Unlike Providence Flats, this place had a little more life in the land. Sparse tufts of grass pushed up between the cracks, and somewhere in the distance, a raven called out. I parked at the edge of the town, the tires crunching over dry earth. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on rust, though there wasn't a cloud in sight. My boots hit the ground and stirred up little swirls of dust that drifted in the still air longer than they should have. The first building I approached was a livery stable, its roof half collapsed, a harness still hanging on the wall as if waiting for a horse that would never return. The wood here was weathered to a soft gray, splintering under my fingertips. Then I saw it. Carved into one of the support beams, deep and deliberate, was the same symbol from Providence Flats. My stomach dropped. I ran my thumb over the grooves. The edges were sharp, clean, not the worn cuts of something carved decades ago. This was recent. I stepped back, scanning the shadows of the stable, and for the briefest second, I thought I saw someone standing in the far corner. Not moving, not breathing, just there. I blinked, and the space was empty. My mouth had gone dry. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but some stubborn part of me pushed forward. I left the stable, crossing the open space toward the main street. The air felt heavier here, as if I'd stepped into a place where time moved differently. The saloon was still standing, its swinging doors long gone. Inside, the floorboards groaned under my weight. A few broken chairs lay scattered, and the bar itself was warped and split. But behind it, lined neatly on the shelf, were glass bottles, all empty, all coated in dust. Except one. It sat in the center of the shelf like it had been placed there on purpose. The glass was cloudy, but I could see something inside, a small bundle of cloth tied with twine. I don't know why I reached for it. Some part of me needed to know if this was connected, if whatever had followed me was capable of leaving messages. The glass was cold against my skin. too cold. I pulled the cork, and the chill that spilled out was sharp enough to make my fingers ache. I tipped the bottle gently, letting the bundle slide into my palm. It wasn't cloth. It was paper, yellowed and brittle, but the twine held it together. I untied it with shaking hands, careful not to tear it, and unfolded it slowly. Inside, scrawled in uneven, frantic handwriting, were 5 words. You can't leave them behind. No name, no date. The paper fell from my hands, and in that moment, I realized the temperature in the saloon had dropped enough for my breath to plume in the air. I turned toward the doorway and froze. There, just beyond the threshold, stood the figure I'd seen in the hotel window back in Providence Flats. Same pale stillness, same wrong tilt of the head. It didn't move toward me. It didn't have to. Its presence was enough to make my knees lock. I blinked and it was gone. But when I stepped outside, the dust at my feet told a different story. 3 round stones, stacked neatly in the center of the street. The top one carved with that same impossible symbol. I didn't touch the stones this time. I just stood there, staring down at them as the heat of the desert pressed against my back and the cold that clung to the air in Jericho Wells seeped into my chest. The world felt split, half blistering sun, half grave chill shadow, and I was caught between them, unsure which side I belonged to anymore. The smart thing would have been to get back in the RV, drive until my tank ran dry, and pretend these places didn't exist. But smart had stopped being an option the moment those stones first appeared in Providence Flats. I could feel it deep down, the way you feel a storm coming in your bones. This wasn't going to let me go. Not unless I faced it. I stepped back from the stones, careful not to disturb the dust, and let my eyes scan the edges of town. The buildings seemed closer now, like the street had narrowed since I'd arrived. The windmill out past the corral spun lazily, though I couldn't hear any wind. A thought rooted itself in my mind, uninvited and unwelcome. What if the ghost towns talk to each other? Not with words, but in the way shadows fall, in the way doors stand open or shut. What if Providence Flats had whispered my name to Jericho Wells? What if the next town was already waiting for me? The idea clung to me as I explored further. I found the old well at the end of the main street, its wooden cover half collapsed. The air above it was cooler, unnaturally so, and when I leaned over, my flashlight beam seemed to get swallowed halfway down, the light thinning into black before it should have. Somewhere deep in that dark, I thought I heard something. Not a voice exactly, but the faint scrape of stone on stone, like the stacking of rocks. Slow, deliberate. I jerked back so fast I nearly tripped, my boot catching on the uneven dirt. The urge to leave hit me hard, but my legs carried me instead toward the far edge of town where a small white building stood. The church. Its door was missing and sunlight poured into the single room. Pews stood in 2 neat rows, though most had collapsed under their own weight. The pulpit was still there, though. Crooked, the wood splintered at the base. I stepped inside, the boards creaking under me. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. It wasn't movement that told me. It was smell. That same wrong sweetness from the general store in Providence Flats, thick enough now to make my eyes water. It coated my tongue, made the air feel syrupy. My heart started pounding in my ears, and I turned in a slow circle, scanning the corners. In the shadow between 2 broken pews, I saw them. The figure. The same pale skin, the same stillness. But now there were 2. One stood, head tilted just like before. The other was crouched low, its hands too long, too thin, resting on the floor as if it were about to crawl toward me. I didn't breathe, didn't move. They didn't either. It was the sound that broke me, the 3rd knock. But this time it wasn't on wood or metal. It was against bone, my bone. 3 sharp taps on my shin, cold radiating outward from the contact. My flashlight clattered to the floor as I stumbled backward, my shoulder slamming into the doorframe. I bolted into the sunlight, my boots kicking up dust in frantic bursts. The RV was across the open street, and every step toward it felt like moving through water. I could swear the buildings were leaning in, narrowing the way, their shadows stretching longer than they should in mid-afternoon. I didn't stop running until I was inside. The door slammed, locks thrown. My hands shook as I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine sputtered, caught, and I tore out of Jericho Wells without looking in the mirrors. But I could still feel eyes on me. I drove until the sun sank, until the highway blurred into an endless ribbon under my headlights. When I finally pulled over on a flat stretch of gravel off the shoulder, my hands were cramped from gripping the wheel so tightly. I sat there in the idling hum of the RV, telling myself it was over for the night. That's when I saw it. In the rearview mirror. On the countertop by the sink. The stones. 3 round river stones stacked neatly. The top one carved with that symbol. And next to them, something new. A piece of folded paper. I reached back with a shaking hand, unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was different this time. Smaller. More careful. They know you're coming. I stared at the note until the words started to blur. They know you're coming. It wasn't a warning. It was a fact. And the more I looked at it, the more I felt the weight of those words settle in my chest. This trip had started as a choice. Now I wasn't sure I had one anymore. The map I kept taped to the wall over the dinette fluttered in the stale air of the RV, even though the windows were shut tight. My eyes traced the road I'd planned to take, up through Utah, maybe into Wyoming, if the weather held. But that line I'd drawn weeks ago with a Sharpie felt meaningless now. It didn't matter where I wanted to go. They knew. The thought lodged deep, and I hated myself for glancing toward the glove compartment. Inside was a folded list I'd made before leaving home, names of ghost towns I'd researched, each one with a dot on the map. A bucket list for a kind of traveler most people didn't understand. But now that list felt less like an itinerary and more like a script I wasn't in control of. My fingers hesitated over the glove box latch, but I opened it anyway. The paper was there, creased and worn from weeks of being shoved in and out. I smoothed it across the table and froze. It had changed. Not in big, obvious ways. My handwriting was still there, the town names in my own pen strokes. But some of them were darker now, as if retraced in fresh ink. Providence Flats, Jericho Wells. And one more at the bottom of the list, a name I had never written. Ash Bellows. The ink was darker than the rest, and the letters had a strange slant to them, like someone had been trying to mimic my style but couldn't quite get it right. I checked the edges of the paper for smudges, fingerprints, anything, but it was clean. Too clean. The RV felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer. I needed air. I stepped outside into the night. The desert was wide open here, like the stars so bright they seemed to hum. I breathed deep, but the air was wrong again, too cold for August, a thin wind carrying that faint sweetness I was starting to dread. Somewhere far off, I heard it. 3 knocks, not loud, not close, just present. I turned slowly, scanning the dark. My flashlight beam caught nothing but the pale dust of the roadside. I told myself I imagined it, that I was jumpy from exhaustion. Then I saw them. At the far edge of my light's reach, 3 stones stacked in the dirt. No footprints around them, the top one carved. And that was the moment I knew I wasn't visiting these ghost towns anymore. I was being sent to them, herded, driven. I went back inside, shut the door, and locked it, the engine already rumbling under my hands. I didn't bother deciding where to go next. I just drove. The road stretched on like a thread through the darkness, and somewhere along it, I knew I'd find Ash Bellows whether I wanted to or not. By morning, the landscape had shifted. The red dirt and sagebrush gave way to cracked clay flats, the sky a dull gray instead of the burning blue I was used to. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though I saw no fires. And then, almost like the world bending in on itself, I saw the sign. Hand-painted, the wood warped, letters barely clinging to the surface. Ash Bellows. Pop. My stomach knotted. I hadn't turned onto any side roads. I hadn't taken any exit. But somehow, I was here. The town was even smaller than the others, maybe 6 buildings total, all blackened like they'd been caught in a fire decades ago. The wind that moved through them was low and hollow, a sound almost like breath. I parked on the outskirts, leaving the engine running. For a long minute, I just sat there, staring. Then I saw movement. In the middle of the street, something shifted. A slow, deliberate motion. 3 stones, stacked neatly, the top one carved, and standing just behind them, as still as the ash-charred buildings, were 3 figures. Waiting. I killed the engine, and for a moment, the silence felt like it had teeth. The figures didn't move. They just stood there, shapes half-sketched in the morning haze, the burned husks of buildings rising behind them like blackened ribs. Their stillness made me feel like the intruder, like I had interrupted something. Every instinct told me to put the RV in reverse and drive until the gas gauge hit empty. But there was a pull here, subtle, steady, that felt less like curiosity and more like inevitability. I stepped out. The crunch of my boots on the brittle clay sounded too loud, too real, against a backdrop that felt otherwise unreal. The air was strange, not just cold, thin, like the oxygen had been leached out of it. My breaths came shorter without me realizing. That faint sweetness was stronger here, but mixed now with something else. The faint, acrid tang of burned wood that no wind had any business carrying after all these decades. The 3 figures didn't react as I moved closer. They were human in shape but wrong in every detail. Their limbs seemed slightly too long, as though stretched by the heat of some invisible fire. Their faces were pale, but when my eyes tried to focus on them, my vision seemed to slide away, like the details refused to settle. And then one of them tilted its head. That motion, slow, deliberate, rooted me to the spot. The same tilt I'd seen in the hotel window of Providence Flats in the church at Jericho Wells, except now it felt heavier. Like the tilt itself was an acknowledgement. My gaze dropped to the stones between us, 3 round river stones, stacked neatly. The top one carved with the symbol. Only this time it wasn't just the starburst shape. It had more lines now, more angles, like the symbol was growing, evolving. I crouched down, not touching them, but close enough to see that the grooves were filled with ash. My fingers twitched toward them before I caught myself. Touching the stone in Providence Flats had started all of this. One of the figures took a step forward. The movement was smooth, unhurried. Its foot touched the ground with a sound that didn't match the clay, too soft, too deliberate, like the press of a hand on wet earth. The others followed, and without a word, they turned and began walking down the main street. They wanted me to follow. Everything in me said no. But I found my boots moving anyway, one step at a time. My breathing was shallow, my pulse loud in my ears. The main street of Ash Bellows was narrower than the others I'd seen. The buildings hunched in close, their charred siding flaking into brittle curls. The wind picked up in fits and starts, making the blackened wood creak like old bones. They led me to the largest structure, a 2-story building whose sign had long since burned away. The doorway was nothing but a black hole, the frame warped from heat. When I stepped inside, the air shifted. It wasn't just colder. It was like the temperature dropped inside my bones. My skin prickled, my teeth ached, my eyes watered instantly. And then I saw the walls. Every inch of them was covered in symbols, the same ones from the stones, carved deep into the charred wood, each one slightly different. Layers upon layers, some so old the grooves had filled with soot, others sharp and fresh. The figures moved to the far end of the room and stopped. One raised its arm, too long, too thin, and pointed. In the corner was a table. On it, a single object, a glass jar, cloudy with ash, sealed with a rusted metal lid. I don't know why I stepped closer. Maybe I thought I'd find another note. Maybe I already knew I would. The jar was cold in my hands, colder than the air around it. My breath fogged the glass as I turned it, and sure enough, inside was a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, my vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer wrongness of the words written there. "You've been here before." The paper slipped from my fingers. My knees nearly gave. My mind raced, scrambling for proof it wasn't true, that I'd never been to this burned-out place in my life. But the figures, they tilted their heads in unison, like they knew something I didn't, like they were waiting for me to remember. My first instinct was to reject it. I'd never been to Ash Bellows. I would have remembered the charred buildings, the thin air, the way the cold clung like a second skin. I told myself the note was just another trick, something left to mess with me, to pull me deeper into whatever game these places were playing. But then the flashes started. Not memories exactly, more like images burned onto the backs of my eyelids. A hand, small and ash-smudged, reaching for mine. The creak of wood underfoot, but not my boots. Lighter steps, faster. Heat, screaming. The smell of that same wrong sweetness, only stronger, mixed with smoke so thick it felt like breathing glass. I staggered back from the table, my shoulder hitting the wall, the carvings pressed into my jacket, sharp against my skin, and for a second it felt like the lines were shifting under the fabric, rearranging themselves to match the growing symbol from the stones. The three figures hadn't moved, but I could feel their focus on me, heavy as a hand on the back of my neck. My breath quickened. The cold was so deep now that my fingertips stung, my knuckles pale and stiff. I needed to get out. I shoved past them, back into the daylight, or what was left of it. The sun was low, its light stretched thin and brittle, and the wind was moving faster now, tugging at my clothes. I could hear something in it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. 3 knocks, over and over. I headed for the RV, boots striking the clay in quick, sharp bursts. The street seemed longer than before, like I'd stepped into a place that could rearrange itself when you weren't looking. The blackened buildings leaned in, their warped shapes almost human in the periphery of my vision. When I reached the RV, the door was ajar. I knew. No, I'd locked it. I'd heard the latch click before I left. But it hung open now, swaying gently, as if inviting me in. Every muscle in my body screamed not to cross that threshold, but I stepped inside anyway, the way you might put your hand on a stove just to prove it's really hot. The first thing I saw was the table by the sink. The stones, 3 round river stones, stacked neatly. But this time, the top one wasn't carved, it was painted. Thick black lines, still wet, the ash-gray surface streaked where the paint had run. The symbol was almost complete now. The empty spaces between the lines filled in until it looked less like a design and more like an eye. And lying next to it was something new, a matchbox, old cardboard, the kind you'd see in a roadside bar. Printed on the front was the name Ash Bellows Tavern in faded red ink. Inside, 3 matches remained, their tips a deep, unnatural black. I didn't touch them. Not yet. Instead, I stepped back, scanning the inside of the RV. Nothing else looked disturbed. No signs of anyone or anything having moved through here. But the cold was worse than outside, so sharp it made my teeth ache when I breathed. Then I saw it. In the rearview mirror, just for a second, the reflection of the street behind me. The 3 figures, standing exactly where I'd left them, their heads tilted in unison. And then, without moving from their place, they were suddenly closer in the reflection, like the mirror had skipped a frame. I snapped my eyes to the back window. Nothing there. When I looked at the mirror again, the street was empty. The matches were still on the table. The stones were still stacked. And the cold wasn't going anywhere. I don't remember making the decision to touch the stones. One moment I was staring at them, my breath clouding in the frigid air of my own RV, and the next my hand was closing around the top one. It was heavier than it looked. Not just in weight. There was a density to it, like holding something that wasn't meant to exist in this world. The paint was still damp, leaving black streaks across my fingertips. The symbol's lines seemed to pull at the edges of my vision, like it wanted me to keep looking until it swallowed everything else. I dropped it onto the counter. Hard. It didn't chip, didn't crack. I grabbed the second stone, slammed it against the sink. The clang of rock on metal echoed naturally long inside the RV, bouncing around until it sounded almost like voices layered over one another. My stomach turned when I realized some of them were laughing. By the time I reached for the last stone, my hands were trembling so bad I nearly dropped it. I threw it at the floor with everything I had, half expecting it to shatter, half terrified it would bleed. It just rolled, slowly, and then stopped perfectly in line with the others, like it had been set there on purpose. The cold deepened. Impossibly. I could feel it sinking into my bones, crawling up my spine in a way that made my vision pulse. The air felt heavier. That's when the tapping started again. 3 knocks, this time from inside the RV. I spun, scanning the walls, the cabinets, the door. My brain was trying to assign the sound to something logical, a pipe expanding, the fridge compressor kicking in, but the rhythm was too precise. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. I followed the sound toward the narrow hallway leading to the sleeping area. My boots felt like they were dragging through wet sand. When I reached the end of the hall, the tapping stopped. For one blissful second, I thought maybe it was over. Then my eyes fell on the small storage compartment near the floor. The one I never used. The one that had been closed since the day I bought this RV. It was open. Inside, the matchbox. Not on the counter anymore. Not with the stones. Just sitting there in the dark space, lid pushed halfway back to reveal the 3 black-tip matches, and beneath it, ashes, fresh, still warm. My first instinct was to slam the compartment shut and get the hell out, but something in me, maybe the same suicidal curiosity that made me keep driving into these towns, reached in and touched the ashes. The warmth wasn't comforting. It was the kind of heat you feel just before something burns you, sharp and alive. I pulled my hand back and found that my fingertips weren't just blackened, they were marked. 3 parallel lines, deep and red, almost like they'd been drawn with a hot wire. From the corner of my eye, movement. I turned toward the rearview mirror. The 3 figures weren't in the street anymore. They were standing in the doorway of my RV, and the door was still closed. I lunged for the ignition. The key turned, but the engine coughed like it was breathing through water. The dash lights flickered weakly, the way they do right before a battery dies, except I'd just replaced it 2 weeks earlier. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep my grip on the wheel. I told myself I wouldn't look back toward the sleeping area, but my eyes betrayed me. The space was empty. No figures, no open doorway. Just the faint echo of something that had already been there, the way a room feels after someone's left it. Charged, unsettled, air still holding the shape of what had been standing inside it. I slammed the gear shift into reverse, backing the RV so fast I clipped a rusted gas pump in front of the diner. The impact rocked the whole frame, but I didn't stop. Gravel sprayed against the undercarriage as I spun the wheel and pointed the headlights toward the single road out of town. I expected to see darkness. Instead, the beams illuminated what looked like a wall of fog about 100 feet ahead. Thick, motionless, and strangely solid. I hit the gas. The tires squealed over the cracked pavement and the RV shot forward. The fog didn't move. When I crossed into it, there was no gradual dimming of light, just an immediate, suffocating absence. The temperature dropped again, and my ears popped like I was driving up a steep mountain road. My headlights barely reached past the hood. That's when the sounds started. Not the knocking, not footsteps, whispering. Too many voices to count, all speaking at once in a low, frantic rush, words overlapping so tightly I couldn't pick one apart from the others. It felt like they were pressing into my skull, searching for somewhere to root. My hands slipped on the wheel, sweat freezing instantly on my skin. I kept driving. The road stretched longer than it should have. I'd checked the map earlier. This highway was less than 3 miles to the junction, but the odometer ticked past 4, then 5, then 6, and still nothing but fog on either side. When the voices began to sync together, forming that same 3-beat rhythm of the knocking, I knew. I wasn't going anywhere. I hit the brakes hard, the RV skidding slightly before stopping dead in the middle of the road. My breathing was loud, ragged. I reached for my phone, no signal, no surprise, and was about to shove it back into my pocket when I saw the notification. A calendar reminder. I hadn't set one. It read, Ash Bellows, 3 days on. And beneath it, in smaller text, bring the matches. I stared until my vision blurred. My pulse was hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The reminder disappeared on its own, replaced by my lock screen. Only it wasn't my lock screen anymore. It was a live view from outside the RV. I could see myself through the windshield, hands frozen on the wheel, fog curling at the edges of the frame. Behind me, impossibly close, three tall shapes stood, their heads bowed like they were listening for something deep inside the earth. And in the reflection of the phone's glass, I saw the faint glow of firelight. Firelight, not behind me, inside. I was 300 miles into Kansas when the interstate blurred into a ribbon of heat and motion, my old Volkswagen camper van rattling gently beneath me. Out here, the horizon feels like it's always moving away, like it knows you're chasing it, and it's in no hurry to be caught. I'd been on the road for days, running on too little sleep and too much bad coffee, chasing no particular destination, just moving because staying still had started to feel like rust. That day, the sky was the kind of washed-out pale that made the land look flat and infinite, and the air through my half-cracked driver's window smelled like cut hay and dust. I wasn't planning to stop, not yet. But the signs started appearing. Rest area ahead, 2 miles, and something in me tightened. I'd been fighting off a headache for hours, the kind that blooms right behind the eyes, and the thought of pulling over for a minute felt like a small mercy. When I rolled into the rest stop, I realized immediately that something was off. At first, it just seemed empty. No travelers sitting on picnic benches, no truckers stretching their legs, no kids running from one bathroom to the other. The only sound was my own engine ticking in the heat. Then I noticed the cars. There were maybe 7 or 8 of them scattered through the lot. Sedans, an old SUV, even a minivan with faded bumper stickers. Some had a thin skin of dust. Others looked like they'd been sitting for weeks. But the strangest part was the open windows. Every single one had its driver's window rolled down just enough to hear the static. Because every single one of them had a radio on. It wasn't music. It wasn't news. It wasn't even static the way you expect it. White noise, hiss, dead air. No, this was voices. I killed the van's engine and just sat for a second, listening. It was like a dozen ghosts were murmuring at once, all out of sync. Snatches of words would rise above the rest. Please, or I'm here, or can you hear me? And then sink back into the murk. I could feel the hair on my forearms lift, though the air was hot enough to make my shirt stick to my back. I should have driven on. Every instinct in me said so. But there's a kind of stubbornness that comes with being on the road too long. You think you've seen it all, that nothing can really surprise you anymore. And part of me didn't believe what I was hearing. It had to be some kind of audio illusion, a trick of distance and echo. I stepped out into the heat. Gravel crunched under my boots. The first car was a dusty blue sedan, license plate half obscured by mud. The radio was faint but clear, a woman's voice, choked and hurried. If someone finds this, tell my mom I'm on Route 83 near. The rest dissolved into static. I stepped back fast, my shoulder brushing the hot metal of the hood. That voice wasn't a broadcast. It wasn't a DJ or a reporter. It was too raw, like someone speaking into a phone with bad reception. I tried another car, an old beige minivan with a cracked windshield. This time, the voice was a man's, older, deliberate. Sun's almost down. I can't keep walking. If you find the static again, loud enough to make me flinch. One by one, I checked them. The voices were different every time. Men, women, young, old. Some crying, some breathing hard, some speaking like they were trying to conserve every word. And one thing bound them together. None of them sounded like they knew they were on the radio. By the time I reached the far end of the lot, my mouth was dry and my pulse felt heavy in my ears. I told myself I'd just get back in my van, leave, pretend I'd never stopped. Then I heard my name. It came from a dark green pickup parked sideways at the very back, its hood propped open. I froze halfway between steps. The voice was male, young, and trembling. If you're there, please pick up. Please, my name. It's happening again. The fact that he knew my name would have been enough to stop me cold. But again, the air felt suddenly too still, like the prairie had forgotten how to breathe. My throat went tight. I hadn't told anyone I was coming this way. I didn't even know I'd be stopping here until 10 minutes ago. I got back into the van faster than I want to admit. My hands shook as I turned the key, but the van just coughed once and died. The dashboard lights flickered, dimmed, and went black. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the line of empty cars with their windows cracked and their radios whispering into the heat. The sounds seemed louder now, like they were all shifting to match each other's tempo. And the more I listened, the more I thought I could hear something beneath the voices, a low, steady tone, almost too deep to register. Not a hum from the radios. Not engine noise. Something else. I cracked my own window and leaned toward it. The voices weren't random anymore. They were calling, not all at once, but in a rhythm, like a chant. And then, without meaning to, I answered. Just a single, stupid hello under my breath. The radios all stopped, every one of them. For half a second, there was silence so heavy it pressed against my eardrums. Then, all at once, every speaker in that lot burst into the same sound. A man laughing, slow, deliberate, steady, and it was a laugh I knew. I slammed the window shut and tried the ignition again, my whole body tense like a wire about to snap. The van's engine sputtered, coughed, and finally caught. I threw it into gear without looking at the road ahead. But as I pulled away, I caught sight of the rearview mirror. The green pickup's hood was down now, and someone was sitting in the driver's seat, watching me leave. I didn't look back again. Not because I didn't want to. God knows I did. But because I was scared of what I might see if I gave in. The Volkswagen's tires hummed on the pavement as I emerged back onto the interstate, and for a few minutes I convinced myself that putting miles between me and that rest stop would put the whole thing behind me. That's what the road is supposed to do, let you outrun things. But the sound followed me. Not in the way you might expect, not the voices, not the laugh. It was quieter than that, something just at the edge of hearing. Like a faint radio station that drifts in and out on a long drive where you catch a word, lose it, then catch another. My van's stereo was off, but I kept glancing at it anyway, waiting for the LED display to flicker on by itself. I told myself I was just hearing the wind, the white noise of the road. But when I passed a semi-truck and caught the shape of its driver in my peripheral vision, my stomach dropped. The man was staring straight ahead, hands fixed on the wheel, and yet I could see his lips moving, forming words, and I swear I could hear them in my head. It's happening again. The same voice from the green pickup. I pulled into the next exit without thinking, my pulse slamming against my throat. A gas station sat just off the ramp, its flickering sign announcing diesel, coffee, and a discount on windshield wipers. The parking lot was empty except for a lone silver coupe parked nose-in near the edge. That's when I noticed it. Its driver's window was rolled down. The memory of that rest stop rushed back like a fever breaking, and I realized I was holding my breath. But I told myself, you're not going over there, you just need gas. That's all. Inside the station, the air smelled like burnt coffee and motor oil. The guy behind the counter looked half asleep, his eyes sunk deep in shadow, skin waxy under the fluorescent lights. I asked if he'd heard anything about the rest area up the interstate, about the abandoned cars. He blinked slow, like he was processing each word. Don't stop there, he said. Not advice, an order. Why? He just shook his head. They've been taking cars out of there for years, towing them off. But they come back. Same plates, same dents, same seats, people. He paused, looking toward the door like he was checking to see if anyone had walked in. They don't come back the same, if they come back at all. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. And the radios? His eyes narrowed. You heard them? I didn't answer. That means they've heard you too. Something in my chest went cold, like ice water spilling under my ribs. What are you talking about? He leaned forward over the counter, his voice dropping to a whisper. They're not recordings. They're still talking, somewhere. And once you answer, they don't stop calling. The low, steady tone I'd heard at the rest stop rose in my memory, almost like I could hear it again now. I took a slow step back, my heel brushing the door. You should keep moving, he said, his gaze locking onto mine. Don't sleep until you're out of the state. And don't answer again. not even if it's someone you love. Outside, the silver coupe was gone. I filled up the van in silence, the pump clicking off like a gunshot in the still air. I drove until the sun dipped and the fields turned black, until the stars came out like frost across the sky. But no matter how far I went, the hum stayed with me. And then hours later, with my headlights cutting through the dark like two weak flashlights, the radio in my van clicked on by itself. The LED display glowed faint green. No station number, no frequency, just a single word. Listen. At first, it was the same murmur, dozens of voices stacked on top of each other, shifting in and out of focus. Then they began to separate like threads pulled from a knot. One by one, they rose until I could hear individual phrases. Near the bridge, cold now, so cold, can't find the road. I gripped the wheel tighter, fighting the urge to speak, to ask questions, to respond. I thought about what the clerk had said. Don't answer, not even if it's someone you love. And then I heard my sister's voice. Please, it's dark. I don't know where I am. The air in the van went thin. My sister lived in Colorado. She'd never been to Kansas. But the fear in her tone, the same catch in her breathing I'd heard when she'd called me after our mother's funeral, it felt real enough to burn through my resolve. I opened my mouth before I could stop myself. Where are you? The voices cut out instantly. Silence, heavier than any I'd ever known. Even the sound of the van on the asphalt seemed to vanish. And then, low and close, so close it felt like it came from the passenger seat, her voice, behind you. My hands jerked on the wheel and the van swerved, tires screaming against the pavement. My eyes darted to the passenger seat, empty. But my rearview mirror, the green pickup, was back there. No headlights, no sound, just rolling along in the dark. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles felt like they'd split the skin. The highway stretched ahead, black and endless, but the real weight was behind me. The green pickup stayed perfectly centered in my rear view, its outline barely visible against the low glow of the moon. No headlights, no engine noise, yet it kept pace like it was tethered to my bumper. I told myself to keep my eyes forward. People crash that way, looking too long at what's chasing them. But every few seconds, instinct dragged my gaze back. The pickup never swerved, never lagged, never gained, just floated in the dark. Then my radio clicked. It didn't hum or crackle this time. It cleared, and from the speakers came a single, low breath. It was the sound someone makes when they lean in close to your ear. I'm here now. The voice wasn't my sister's anymore. It was lower, rougher, as if dragged over gravel, male, but stretched, like it wasn't used to human words. The road ahead curved slightly, the faint green of an overhead exit sign catching in my windshield. Rest area, 2 miles. No, I wasn't doing that again. I pressed the accelerator, the van shuddering as the speedometer climbed. My headlights caught the pale blur of mile markers whipping past. My jaw ached from clenching it. Then in the mirror, I saw the pickup's headlights flare, twin beams cutting into the dark like the first stab of dawn. But the color was wrong. Not yellow, not white. Green. Sick, dim green like light passing through old pond water. The glow filled the van's cabin. My hands looked alien under it, veins rising like black wires under the skin. The dashboard lights flickered, and my speedometer needle began to tremble. The road pitched slightly downhill, the kind of slope you don't notice unless you're watching the way the land flattens ahead. But the van began to slow. I pressed the pedal to the floor. The engine roared. The tires whined, but my speed bled away. 60, 55, 50. My pulse hit harder than the engine's vibration. The radio clicked again, a chorus of voices this time, layered, rising, all in different rhythms but speaking the same word, stop. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. That one word burrowed deep, settling behind my sternum like a command I'd been born to obey. My foot slackened on the pedal before I realized what I was doing. The van coasted. I thought about the clerk at the gas station, how his voice had lowered, how he'd said not to answer again. I'd already broken that rule. And now, whatever this was had decided the next step. In the corner of my eye, the exit loomed closer. I thought if I just made it past, if I stayed on the main road, I could break whatever this was. But the wheel jerked. Hard. The van swerved toward the off-ramp like a hand had grabbed the steering column. My seatbelt bit into my chest as I fought it, muscles screaming, but the tires gripped the ramp and pulled me down into the darkness of the rest area. This one wasn't the same as before. It was smaller. Just one loop of road curling around a center island of grass and a single streetlight buzzing with moths. But the parking spaces, every single one was filled with cars. Not old, dusty ones like before. These were clean, some still idled. Windows cracked just enough for the sound to slip through. The radios were all on. My own speakers joined them, the voices weaving together into that almost chant I'd heard before. Beneath it, the deep tone throbbed like the pulse of something underground. The green pickup rolled in behind me, blocking the exit. I tried reverse. Nothing. The shifter wouldn't move. My headlights dimmed, then blinked out. The radios synced. All at once, they fell silent, like the air had been sucked out of the lot. Then, in unison, every voice in every car spoke the same sentence. "It's your turn." A figure stepped out of the green pickup. I couldn't see his face, just the way he moved, slow and deliberate, as if he knew I wasn't going anywhere. His boots crunched on the gravel. He passed each car without looking in, like they weren't worth his attention. When he reached my van, he stopped at the driver's side door. Through the glass, his eyes caught the dim glow from the streetlight. Pale, but wrong. Reflective, like an animal's in a flashlight beam. He leaned in close enough for the glass to fog from his breath. "You shouldn't have answered," he said. The lock on my door clicked open by itself. I shoved my shoulder against the door, trying to keep it closed, but it felt like I was pushing against nothing. Like the lock wasn't the only thing holding it shut a second ago. The handle turned slow, deliberate, like a hand testing the weight of the moment before prying it open. The door swung outward into the night. Heat from the idling engines around us pressed in, mingling with the stale smell of dust and something faintly metallic, like coins left in a hot glove box. The man, if you could call him that, stood close enough for me to see the uneven rise and fall of his chest. But his eyes, they didn't track like human eyes. They fixed and stayed fixed, as if focusing took more effort than it should. "You've been listening," he said, voice low, as if afraid the others might overhear. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Who are you?" His gaze twitched just once to the radio in my dash. "It's not who. It's when." The words landed in my stomach like a drop of ice water. I glanced at the other cars. No one moved, no faces in the driver's seats, just the faint silhouettes of heads tilted toward their speakers, as if still listening. The low throb beneath it all, the tone I'd heard at the first rest stop, was back, but now I felt it in my teeth, in the fillings, in the hollow spaces of my bones. "They call," he said, "and sometimes someone answers, and when they do." His hand brushed the edge of my open door, and for a moment I thought he might slam it shut. "It's a seat you can't give back." He leaned in further. His breath was warm against my ear. "You're in it now." I tried to shove him back, but the movement was like pushing against water, slow, resistant, dreamlike. My pulse thundered in my ears, and for a moment I couldn't tell if the sound was mine or the dozens of murmuring radios swelling in volume again. One voice cut through the rest, my sister's. Get out now, don't let him." Static swallowed her before she could finish. The man's head tilted, listening. "They get louder when they're close." That sentence struck something deep in me. Louder when they're close, which meant the voices weren't just on the radios. They were near. I twisted the key in the ignition. The van coughed once, caught and sputtered like it was choking on its own breath. The radios around us surged, a wall of pleading and crying and breathless commands. The man didn't flinch. "You can't drive away," he said, almost gently. "Not until you leave something behind." I shoved the gear into reverse. The tires spun, screeching against the asphalt, but the van barely moved an inch. The green pickup still blocked the exit. Then, without him touching it, the driver's door swung wider. My seatbelt unlocked with a sharp click. He extended a hand. His nails were dark, not dirty, but stained, like the color went all the way down into the keratin. Come on. I don't know what kept me from taking it. Maybe the memory of my sister's voice, maybe the way the air around him seemed heavier, as if it carried the weight of every voice I'd heard. But I shoved the door hard, slamming it into him, and at the same time slammed my foot on the gas. The van lurched forward, not away from him, but toward the grass island at the center of the rest stop. My tires tore across it, gravel pinging the undercarriage. I caught the streetlight in my side view as it flickered and went out. The pickup roared to life behind me. I hit the far edge of the lot and didn't slow. The front tires dropped hard onto the slope beyond, suspension groaning. I was off the pavement now, bouncing across a narrow strip of ditch before the nose of the van hit gravel again. An access road, unlit, unmarked. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My hands ached from holding the wheel so tight, and every second I expected the green glow to fill the mirrors again. The radios kept going, even as I put distance between me and the rest stop. But now they weren't all in sync. Some voices were fading, others were clearer. One of them was me. You can't drive away, not until you leave something behind. My own voice, exactly as I just said it seconds ago. I drove until the road spat me back onto the interstate. The sky was starting to pale in the east, the first signs of morning bleeding through. For a moment, the world felt like it was tilting toward normal again. Traffic in the opposite lanes, a billboard advertising pie somewhere in Missouri. But the LED display on my radio still glowed faint green. The station number flickered, and then the word came back, just like before. Listen. I yanked the radio's power knob to the left until it clicked off. The display went dark. For 3 seconds, I felt the smallest flicker of relief. Then the speakers hissed to life again. No display, no light, just sound. A single voice, not layered this time. A woman. Calm. Too calm. You left the door open. My stomach lurched. I glanced to my right. The passenger door was shut, locked, handle forward. But the way she said it, it wasn't about the van. I kept driving. The sun broke over the fields, lighting up miles of wheat that rippled in the wind like an endless golden ocean. But the warmth didn't reach inside the van. My breath came out visible in the cold air pooling under the dash, even though the outside temperature was climbing. I passed a sign. Next services, 48 miles. No towns, no exits, just the highway cutting through the middle of nowhere. The voice came again, same tone, same weightless calm. You should have stayed. I swallowed against the dryness in my throat. Stayed where? The question left my lips before I remembered the rule. Don't answer. The wheat fields ended abruptly, giving way to flat scrubland. In the distance, far beyond where the heat was starting to haze the air, a shape moved. Small, dark. At first, I thought it was a lone tree, but then it shifted. Just enough for me to see it wasn't fixed to the ground. The voice in the van changed. Not the words, still saying, you should have stayed. But now it was coming from two places at once. The speakers and the shape in the distance. It was carrying the voice. The miles ticked by. The shape drew closer, not because I was heading toward it, but because it was pacing me, just outside the road's shoulder. Even through the dust and distance, I could tell it was the same figure who'd opened my door at the rest stop. The way the shoulders rolled forward, the way the steps never faltered, it was him, and he was barefoot. I couldn't see the details, but each step seemed to drum through the ground itself. The sound traveled up the steering column, through the pedals, into my bones. I pushed the van harder. 80, 85. The engine strained, and the speed wavered like it was fighting gravity itself. The figure didn't fall behind. The radio clicked. Another voice, my sister's again, closer than before, whispering like she was inches from my ear. You can't outrun him, not here. Where's here? I snapped, and the moment I said it, the air shifted. The road ahead bent in a way I couldn't remember from the map, a slow, banking curve that seemed to pull the horizon with it. The scrubland dropped away, replaced by a flat plain of cracked earth, the kind you only see at the bottom of a drained lake. I should have been in Kansas, but this didn't look like Kansas. It didn't look like anywhere I'd driven before. The radio hummed. Then all the voices came back, louder than I'd ever heard them, the words overlapping but distinct enough to make out. Next turn. Don't miss it. He's waiting. The figure on the plane had stopped moving. He stood angled toward me, his head tilted as if listening to the chorus. I caught a glint of that animal-like reflection in his eyes again, even from this distance. And then, without walking, he was closer. One moment, 100 yards away. The next, right at the edge of the asphalt. I swerved hard to avoid him, the van's tires skidding toward the soft shoulder. My seatbelt locked across my chest, the world tilted, the horizon snapping back into place. When I straightened the wheel, the figure was gone. But my passenger seat wasn't empty anymore. It was occupied. He sat there like he'd always been there, body angled toward the windshield, hands resting neatly on his knees. The clothes were wrong for the heat, dark wool coat frayed at the cuffs, the faint sheen of moisture along the shoulders, as if he'd just stepped out of rain that hadn't fallen here in years. I didn't look at his face right away. Some instinct told me that would be giving something up before I knew the cost. My eyes stayed fixed on the road, but I could feel him turning his head, measuring me. When he finally spoke, it wasn't one voice. It was all of them. Every voice from every radio, layered and moving in a way that made my stomach churn. They didn't speak over each other. They wove. Rising, falling, sliding between tones, the syllables folding in on themselves until they made something like a sentence. You're late. My grip on the wheel tightened. I'm not stopping. The hum returned, deep and steady, vibrating through the floorboards. His knee brushed against the center console, and the vibration got stronger. You're already stopped, the voices said. I flicked my eyes toward the speedometer. 65. Needle steady. But when I looked out the windshield, the scenery wasn't moving like it should. The cracked earth stretched in both directions, and the road ahead hung frozen, as if I'd been driving into the same half mile for hours. My jaw clenched. What do you want? The heads of the voices shifted mid-breath. One became a child's tone, soft and pleading. I want you to finish the call. The van shuddered, not like a mechanical fault, but like something had passed through it. The seatbelt went slack against my chest. I risked a glance at him. The eyes weren't just reflective now, they were wet, like they held something behind them, pressing to get out. And I realized it wasn't just light bouncing back at me. It was movement. Shapes shifting in there, too small and too fast to make sense of. He tilted his head. The hum deepened until I could feel it in the hollow of my skull. Say it, he murmured. Not the layered voices now, just one. The same voice I'd heard from the green pickup at the first rest stop. Say my name. The thing was, I didn't know his name. I hadn't heard it. But even as I thought that, something in my mind began offering one up. A word I didn't recognize, but which fit into the empty space like it had always belonged there. The moment I realized I was about to speak it, I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. The copper taste of blood broke the rhythm of the hum. His lips twitched, almost a smile, but not the kind that belonged to relief or humor, the kind that said he knew something inevitable had only been delayed. You'll answer, he said. The voices flooded back through the van's speakers, overlapping, a rush of sound so loud it rattled the rearview mirror. The scenery snapped forward again, miles of highway unwinding like nothing had happened. But the passenger seat was empty. I didn't trust it. I drove with my eyes flicking between the road and that seat, waiting for it to fill again. And then I noticed the door handle on the inside was turned down. I kept one hand on the wheel and one hovering just above the passenger door handle, like if I stared at it long enough, I could will it back into place. But it stayed angled down, that faint mechanical slack in it, the way a latch feels just before it gives. The road ahead blurred into a tunnel of sunlight and heat shimmer. No other cars, no exits, nothing to break the monotony except the occasional mile marker ticking by like a countdown I didn't understand. Then the hum came back, quieter this time, almost polite, like it was waiting for me to lean in before it hit full volume. It seeped through the floor, through the steering column, into my fingertips. The fillings in my teeth ached. From the speakers, a voice spoke low and slow. Not layered, not frantic, just deliberate. Pull over. I shook my head hard, muttering under my breath, not a chance. The van bucked once, like I'd hit a pothole, though the asphalt was smooth. My hand dropped to the gear shift on instinct. That's when the passenger door handle gave a little twitch. Up, then back down, like someone inside was testing it. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The green pickup wasn't behind me, just an empty stretch of highway so long it seemed to vanish into heat haze. The hum deepened. The handle twitched again. This time, a whisper slipped out from right beside me. Not from the speakers, not from anywhere outside. From the empty air in the passenger seat. Let me drive. My throat tightened. You're not real. But the voice came again, sharper, carrying all the layered tones at once. Then you won't mind if I take the wheel. The van jerked hard left. My shoulders slammed into the driver's door, seatbelt biting deep. I yanked the wheel back, but it fought me like something heavier than my own arms was working against me. The tires hit the rumble strip, the whole frame rattling like it might come apart. In my periphery, I saw movement, like someone leaning forward in the passenger seat, hand reaching across toward the wheel. But when I turned my head, the seat was still empty, except for the indentation. The cushion was depressed, the fabric creased exactly where a body would be sitting. I didn't think. I stomped the accelerator. The van howled, speed climbing, wind roaring through the cracked window. But the hum only grew louder, wrapping around the engine noise until it was all I could hear. Faster, the voice said, almost laughing now. I want to see how far you think you can get. I kept my eyes locked on the horizon. If I looked at the seat, at the handle, at the door, I knew I'd see something I couldn't unsee. Then, miles ahead, a sign appeared out of the shimmer. Rest area, 1 mile. Not possible. I hadn't passed an exit for an hour. The handle clicked once, fully down now. The passenger door swung open against the wind, not tearing off its hinges like it should, but holding steady, perfectly parallel with the van as it moved. The voice beside me spoke again, calm, steady, and certain. You'll stop this time. The wind knifed through the open passenger door, hot and dry, carrying the smell of scorched asphalt and something faintly sweet, like fruit that had been left in the sun too long. My knuckles whitened on the wheel, the tendons in my arms pulled tight as cables. The rest area sign loomed larger with every second. No other traffic in sight, just me, the road, and that door gaping open like an invitation I didn't want. I kept my foot welded to the accelerator, telling myself I could blast past it, that whatever was waiting there couldn't drag me in if I didn't slow down. Then the steering wheel jerked hard to the right, not a gradual pull, an immediate bone-snapping wrench. My wrists popped as I fought it. The tires squealed, rubber burning against the pavement, the van's frame lurching under me like it was about to roll. The hum deepened, vibrating through the seat into my spine. The horizon tilted. You're turning, the voice said. And I was. My hands fought the wheel, but the van's nose locked toward the off-ramp, tires biting into the lane like they'd been waiting for this. The open door seemed to draw me in, the rush of air folding around the cab like a funnel. I hit the brakes hard, the seatbelt snapping across my chest. The van slowed, but not enough. Gravel spit out from under the tires as I hit the ramp. This rest stop was different from the others. Smaller, tighter, hemmed in by a thin line of leafless trees. The lot was arranged in a perfect circle around a central light pole, and every parking space was full. Every single one. The cars were pristine, paint gleaming under the pale afternoon sun, windows cracked exactly the same amount, radios on, but this time there were people inside. They sat in their driver's seats, hands folded neatly on their laps, heads tilted slightly toward the radios, faces slack, mouths slightly open as if they'd been caught mid-sentence. Not one of them looked at me. The open door beside me clicked once, and I felt a weight shift into the passenger seat. I didn't turn my head. You've kept them waiting, the voice said. close enough that I could feel the words on my cheek. I scanned the lot for a gap, an opening I could thread the van through, but the cars were arranged so tightly that there was no clear path. I'd have to plow through one to get out. The hum built until it was inside my skull, pushing at the backs of my eyes. The people in the cars began to move, not turning to face me, but tapping their fingers in time with the hum. Perfect rhythm, perfect unison. The voice beside me leaned in. They'll take turns, same as you will. Something in me snapped. I slammed the van into reverse, tires screaming as I backed toward the ramp. The steering fought me, the hum rose, but I kept my foot down. When I hit the edge of the lot, the passenger door slammed shut on its own. The van shot backward out of the circle, and the hum cut off. No voices, no radios, just the open interstate again. I didn't breathe until the rest stop was a shrinking speck in the mirror. For the first 20 miles, I convinced myself I'd done it, that I'd outrun whatever that was. The sky ahead was turning the color of old bone, the kind of flat daylight that makes the world look harmless. The hum was gone, the passenger seat was empty, the handle back in place. Then I passed an old red farm truck headed the other way. Its driver never looked at me, but as it drew level, I caught the faintest sound through my half-cracked window. My name. Not shouted, not even spoken loud enough for a normal human ear to catch at highway speed, but I heard it. Clear. Another mile, another car, this one a faded Buick. Same thing. Windows up, driver looking straight ahead, but the sound threading through the air between us. My name. I flicked my radio on without thinking. The display lit up with a random FM frequency, no station name. Static hissed for a heartbeat. Then layered under it, voices I recognized. Not strangers this time, people I knew. People I loved. Come back. Don't make us wait. It's easier if you stop. I twisted the knob hard to off. The display died. The voices didn't. I passed a gas station that looked abandoned. Boarded windows, rusted pumps, but the tinny outdoor speakers crackled on as I drove by. My name again, dragged out and drawn into a shape it had never been in before, like someone else was wearing it. The air in the van shifted, heavy, thick, not with heat, but with presence. The mirrors caught motion, 3 cars behind me now, all keeping the same distance, all with their drivers' windows rolled down. I pushed the van harder. 80, 85. The steering wheel trembled in my grip. Up ahead, the horizon shimmered, bending like heat mirage, but this wasn't heat. The sky above it was darker than the rest, a bruised kind of purple. As I closed in, I realized the shimmer was dozens, maybe hundreds of cars pulled off the road on both sides. Their windows all cracked the same way, all their radios on. Every voice I'd ever heard since Kansas came spilling out at once, overlapping, impossible to ignore. But now they weren't just calling my name, they were giving me directions. Left at the bridge, don't miss the turn, almost there. I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel so hard my palms ached. I'm not going anywhere you tell me to. A laugh answered me, slow, deliberate. The same laugh I had heard at the first rest stop, the one that had followed me onto the interstate. And then from somewhere deep in the chorus, you already are. The cars began to move, not toward me, but alongside me, falling into a perfect pace. The hum returned, faint at first, then tightening, pressing against my skull like invisible hands. The lines on the road blurred and the daylight began to dim, though the sun still hung in the sky. The bridge appeared ahead, just as they'd said. Narrow, 2 lanes, no guardrails. The voices surged, urgent now. Left. Left now. Left. My hands jerked toward the wheel without my permission. The wheel fought me like something alive, pulling toward the turn. My wrists burned from the strain. The bridge loomed closer. Wooden planks gray with age, gaps between them showing flashes of the water far below. No rails, no second chances. The voices were no longer in sync. Some were shouting for me to turn, others to keep going, their tones jagged and desperate. Left now. It's safe. Don't let them take you. It's too late if you pass it. Every nerve in my body screamed to pick a side, but I couldn't tell which one was mine anymore. My muscles felt split between 2 instincts, flight and surrender. each pulling at opposite ends. The hum built under it all, so low it rattled in my bones. The van's engine note wavered, like it was straining against something heavier than gravity. My peripheral vision started to narrow, the edges closing in like I was falling down a long, dark tunnel. I forced my eyes forward and caught a movement at the center of the bridge. Someone standing dead still between the lanes, coat whipping in the wind, barefoot, head tilted toward me. The man from the rest stop. And just behind him, filling the length of the bridge, was the green pickup. No driver, headlights glowing that wrong, pond water green. Left, the layered voices commanded in perfect unison now, but left didn't lead to the bridge. Left was a narrow dirt track breaking off just before it, a path I hadn't noticed until that moment. I snapped the wheel hard. Gravel exploded under the tires as the van fishtailed onto the track. My shoulder slammed into the door, seatbelt cutting into my chest. The hum faltered. The chorus broke apart into chaos, voices shouting over each other in a dozen directions. Wrong way. He'll follow you. You can't leave now. The track jolted under me, ruts deep enough to rattle the cabinets in the back. Dust rolled up behind me in thick plumes, swallowing whatever view I had of the bridge or the man. I kept driving until my teeth ached from the vibration. The van felt like it was trying to shake itself apart. Then, without warning, the track ended. Just stopped. Ahead of me lay nothing but a dead plain of cracked earth, stretching in all directions. No road, no bridge, no trees, and standing in the middle of it, 50 yards ahead, was the green pickup. The headlights blinked once. Then the radio in my dash lit up. No station number, no text, just a pulsing green glow. The voices returned, not urgent now, but patient, certain. You made the turn, they said together. Now finish the call. The air inside the van felt heavier than the outside, as if the walls were pressing inward. My chest rose and fell in shallow pulls, every breath tasting faintly metallic, like blood on a copper penny. The green glow from the radio painted the dashboard, my hands, the windshield. It pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I stared at the pickup. The driver's door swung open with slow precision, like it had all the time in the world. He stepped out. Same dark coat. Same bare feet against the cracked earth. His face was clearer now. Too clear. Every feature sharp enough to cut, but not aligned quite right, like a photo printed on warped paper. You've been listening, he said, and the sound of his voice came from everywhere. The air, the earth under the tires, the hum inside my teeth. I gripped the wheel so tight my nails dug crescents into my palms. I didn't want to. He tilted his head, a tiny smile creeping in. No one ever does. The green glow from the radio deepened, and I noticed movement in the pickup bed. At first, it looked like a pile of old blankets. Then one of them shifted. A hand slid free, thin, pale, the nails blackened at the tips. Another hand followed. And then a head, eyes wide open but blind, mouth moving silently. It wasn't just one. Bodies sat upright in the bed of the truck, each one with that same blind stare, lips forming words I couldn't hear over the hum. They're still calling, he said, and you're the only one who can answer them now. The glow intensified until it drowned the cab of the van. The radio dial flickered, then began to cycle through frequencies on its own. 89.7, 101.5, 92.3, each one catching a different voice mid-sentence. Help me. Can't feel my hands. Tell them where I am. Every plea landed like a weight in my chest, heavy and cold. I shook my head. I'm not part of this. He stepped closer, bare feet silent on the dead ground. You are. The moment you spoke back, you opened the line. It doesn't close until you finish the call. What does that even mean? My voice cracked on the last word. He stopped at my window. The reflection of his eyes in the glass caught the green glow and fractured it into dozens of tiny lights, like there was an entire sky trapped inside them. It means you pick one, he said softly. One voice, one story. You speak for them until it's done. And if I don't, the smile widened, then they'll all keep talking, forever, until there's no room left in your head for anything else. The hum rose another pitch, and the voices swelled with it, pressing against me from all sides. It felt like being in a room where the walls were made of people whispering at my back, close enough to feel their breath. "Choose," he said. The green glow was in my vision now, bleeding into every shape and shadow. My thoughts scattered under the weight of it. One voice, just one, rose above the rest. My sister's. "Please, I don't know where I am." My mouth opened. "Please, I don't know where I am." The moment I heard her again, clearer than she'd ever been through the static, something in me broke. I didn't care if it was really her or something wearing her voice like a mask. If there was even a sliver of a chance it was her, I couldn't let her fade into the hum. "I choose her," I said, and the words came out steadier than I felt. The effect was instant. The other voices fell silent, cut off, mid-breath, mid-sentence. The van's cabin felt bigger without them pressing against me. The air moved again, though it was cold enough now to make the hair on my arms stand. The man's expression didn't change, but the green light deepened, curling around him like smoke. "Then you finish her call." The radio stopped cycling frequencies, a faint click, and it locked onto one channel. No number, no name, just a flat green line on the display. Her breathing came first. Shallow, uneven. I could picture her with the phone pressed to her mouth, trying not to cry, trying not to make a sound that would draw whatever she was hiding from. "Talk to me," I said, leaning toward the speaker. "Where are you?" A pause. Then, it's dark, cold. My feet hurt. "There's a road, but it's wrong. It just keeps turning back on itself." My grip on the wheel tightened. "What do you see?" "Cars. Parked. All of them have the windows down." My stomach nodded. "They're playing something," she continued. "It's voices. I think they're calling for me." I glanced at the man outside my window. His smile was still fixed in place, but his eyes were locked on the radio, not on me, watching, listening. "You have to tell me something I can use," I said quickly, fighting the chill crawling up my neck. "A sign, a landmark, anything." Her breath caught like she'd just seen something. "There's a light pole, only one. It's buzzing." My mind went straight to the second rest stop, the one with the perfect circle of parked cars, the central light pole swarming with moths. "Don't go near it," I said, my voice sharp enough to surprise even me. The hum rose again, not from the radio, but from outside, from the cracked earth itself. The man's coat shifted in a wind I couldn't feel. "She's already there," he said softly, like it was a secret between us. The radio crackled. My sister's breathing quickened. Something's knocking on the window. I slammed my palm against the dash. "Look at me. Don't answer. Don't say a word back." Her voice went small. "But it knows my name." The man outside leaned closer, his reflection stretching in the glass until it looked like his face was pressed right against mine. "You can tell her not to answer," he murmured, "but the first time you hear yourself calling her name, she will." And that's when it hit me. That's how it happened. Not strangers calling strangers, but someone you trust, someone you'd follow without thinking, speaking in a voice that's supposed to be safe. On the radio, I heard it. My own voice, low and calm. "It's me. Open the door." Her breathing on the radio turned jagged, like she'd just been sprinting, though I knew she hadn't moved. That sound, my voice, spilled out of the speakers again, calm, certain, exactly the way I'd talk to her if I were standing right there. "It's me. Open the door," she whispered, almost to herself. "You found me." "No," I barked, leaning so close to the radio my forehead nearly touched it. "That's not me. Don't open anything. Don't even move." The man outside straightened slightly, tilting his head like he was listening to music only he could hear. You hear it the way she does, don't you? Warm, familiar, just enough truth to pull you in. On the radio, my false voice spoke again, softer this time. "You're safe now. Come on." I felt my pulse in my teeth. "Tell me where you are." "I'm in the van," she said. The breath froze in my lungs. "Describe it," I demanded. "It's dark inside, but there's light on the dash. Green. You're sitting in the driver's seat." The hum surged under my ribs. My hands gripped the wheel until my nails bit into my palms. "That's not me," I said through clenched teeth. "It's not me." Her voice wavered. "But it looks like you." The man outside smiled wider, the skin at the corners of his mouth straining in a way that felt wrong to watch. And if she believes it's you, she'll answer. She'll finish her call, and she'll sit in your seat next. The van's cabin seemed to fold inward, every surface closing in. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest until each breath felt stolen. The hum now matched my heartbeat, every pulse a push towards something I didn't want to see. On the radio, the sound of a latch clicking. "Don't you dare," I shouted, slamming my palm against the dash. "Don't." Too late. The scrape of a door swinging open came through the speakers, followed by a long, low exhale that wasn't hers. The green glow on my radio pulsed brighter, ease washing the cabin in that sick color. In the reflection of the windshield, I saw movement in the back of my van, shapes shifting, rising from where there'd been nothing seconds ago. I turned. The seats were full, every one of them occupied by faces I didn't know, all turned toward me, mouths half open as if waiting for me to speak. The man outside stepped back from my window, gesturing toward them with an open hand. "They're yours now, until you pass the call to someone else." They stared at me without blinking, their stillness worse than any sudden movement could have been. No shifting, no breathing I could see, just the faint sway of their heads like they were listening to a rhythm I couldn't hear. The green glow from the radio pulsed across their faces, washing them into the same sickly hue. In that light, their features blurred in strange ways, mouths too wide, eyes sunken and deep, as if shadow had seeped into their skin and stayed there. I forced myself to face forward, hands welded to the wheel. "I'm not taking them," I said. "I'm not passing this to anyone." The man outside let the silence stretch until it felt like a rope tightening around my throat. Then he smiled. Not smug, not cruel, but like a teacher who knows you haven't studied for the test. "You will," he said quietly, "because if you don't, they'll keep talking, all of them. All the time. You'll hear them when you try to sleep, when you eat, when you breathe. They'll crowd out every thought until the only thing left in your head is the call." I shook my head, jaw locked. "No." A woman's voice came from the back seat, trembling, almost gentle. "It's not so bad if you choose someone you don't know. A stranger's lighter to carry." Another voice, this one a child's, followed right after, flat and empty. "But it works faster if it's someone you love." The radio flared, brighter than it had yet been, flooding the cab until I had to squint against it. The hum swelled, and through it I could hear the sound of countless radios clicking on in the distance, one after another, like a wave rolling toward me from all directions. The man's voice cut through them all, low and certain. "You've already chosen once. That's why she's here now. Choose again, and you leave with just your own voice in your head. Refuse, and you'll never have a quiet moment again until you die." The green light began to fade from the radio's faceplate, replaced by a faint list of frequencies scrolling down the display, numbers that meant nothing, yet each one made my chest tighten when it appeared. And then I understood. Each number was a person. Each one was someone else's call. The list slowed, stopped. My sister's frequency sat there on the display, pulsing. "Pass it back to her," the man said. "She'll understand. You got her out, she gets you out. That's the rule." I shook my head. "I'm not putting her back in." The faces in the seats leaned forward, not in unison, but in a ripple. One, then another, until they were all closer to me than they had been. Their mouths moved now, each forming a single word in perfect silence. The man mouthed it too. "Choose." I stared at the radio, the pulsing number on the display, my sister's number, like it had been carved into the plastic. The hum was steady now, not the kind that built towards something, but the kind that sat in your chest, patient, knowing it could wait you out. "I'm not doing it," I said, my voice low, but the sound felt swallowed before it left my mouth. The man outside tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as though he were listening to something far away. "You think that's strength," he said. "It's just delay." The faces in the back seats leaned closer still. One of them, a man with wet hair plastered across his forehead, let his lips part just enough for a whisper to slip through. "You can't keep them all quiet forever." The hum rose just slightly, like a single heartbeat. My sister's voice returned through the speakers, softer than before. Please, I just want to go home. I dug my nails into the wheel, trying to anchor myself in the pain, but my own voice, my real voice, rose from the back seat, overlapping hers. You know how to end it. I clenched my jaw so tight I thought my teeth might crack. No. The green glow from the radio began to seep outward, bleeding into the seams of the dashboard, into the van's panels, down into the floorboards. My shoes lit faintly from below. The whole vehicle was becoming part of that sick, pulsing signal. The man outside stepped away from the driver's side and moved toward the front of the van. He stopped directly in my headlights, coat fluttering against a wind that didn't exist. He didn't need to speak. I could hear him in my head now, as clear as if he were in the seat next to me. If you don't pass it, it will grow. It will follow every mile you drive. Every stranger you pass will hear your voice. And eventually, one of them will answer. The display on the radio shifted. My sister's number slid upward, replaced by another number, then another. Faces began to flicker on the glass of the windshield. Strangers, friends, people I hadn't seen in years, each one looking at me as though they were waiting for me to call their name. Choose, they whispered together, perfectly in sync. The numbers began to cycle faster. The faces blurred together into a mass of mouths and eyes, all pressed against the invisible skin of the glass. I gritted my teeth, staring straight ahead, trying not to look at the radio, trying not to... Then the display froze. Not on my sister's number, on mine. The man smiled, teeth catching the green light like glass. Then you'll carry yourself. The radio clicked off. The van was silent. The faces in the back were gone. The hum was gone. Even the man outside was gone. Only the empty plain stretched ahead, cracked earth running in every direction. I reached for the key, thinking maybe I could start the engine, get back to a road, find something familiar. But when I turned it, the sound that came through the speakers wasn't the van's engine. It was my own voice calling my name. I never planned on taking the coastal road that night. I'd been aiming for the inland route, the safer one, the one with gas stations that stayed open past 10 and little roadside diners that smelled of burnt coffee and pancakes. But the map on my phone glitched, spinning endlessly in that mocking little circle, and I found myself turning west toward the sound of the ocean I couldn't yet see. The Redwood coastline is the kind of place people talk about in postcards and travel blogs. Towering trees that blot out the sky, the salt air so thick you can taste it before you even hit the shore. But at night, it's something else. The trees lean in like they're listening, their bark catching just enough moonlight to look like pale, silent faces. The air feels heavier, harder to breathe, as though it's already decided you're not supposed to be there. It was early September, and I was traveling alone in my RV, a 2002 Winnebago I'd been fixing up for months, finally ready to take on the road. My friends back in Oregon thought I was crazy for doing these solo trips, especially so close to the fall storms. You're just asking to get stranded out there, my buddy Nate had told me. One busted belt or bad alternator, and you're sleeping in the dark with nothing but bears for company. I'd laughed it off. I'd been camping my whole life. I knew how to handle the wild. Or at least, I thought I did. Around 9 that night, the fog rolled in. It didn't come slowly like you'd expect. Not a gentle creep along the asphalt. It poured in like someone had tipped a bucket over the entire coastline. One minute, the headlights cut clear through the air, and the next, they hit nothing but a solid wall of pale gray. The moisture clung to the windshield so fast I could hear it hissing against the wipers. I slowed down, knuckles tightening on the steering wheel. The road twisted ahead, no guardrails, just a cliff that dropped into black water I couldn't see but could hear. The distant, low crash of waves against rock. The sound was strange, though. It didn't have the rhythm of normal surf. It was uneven, almost like breathing. I told myself it was just the wind. By the time I found the turnout, I was already tense from driving barely 20 miles an hour for the last half hour. The turnout wasn't marked on any map, just a dirt shoulder with enough space to pull the RV halfway off the road. I figured I'd wait it out until morning. Fog usually burned off by dawn. Inside, I made some tea, tried to ignore how the fog pressed against every window like it was trying to get in. The condensation streaked downward in slow, dragging lines. I'd left the engine idling for a bit to keep the heat going, but when I reached for the key to shut it off, the engine sputtered. Not just the usual cough of an old motor, but a sharp, choking sound like it was being strangled. Then it died. No power. The interior lights dimmed to nothing. The electric hum of the fridge went silent. Even the faint buzz from my phone charger cut off. I sat there holding the keys in my hand, listening. It wasn't quiet, not exactly. Outside, there was a faint clicking sound, irregular and metallic, as though someone was slowly dragging a piece of metal along the side of the RV. I froze. I've camped enough to know what branches sound like against metal. This wasn't that. It had weight, intention. I thought about Nate's warning. The temperature inside dropped fast, the kind of cold that creeps into your bones no matter how many layers you have on. I dug out a flashlight, clicked it on, and instantly regretted it. The beam only reached a foot or two before the fog swallowed it whole, the light bouncing back like I was shining it into milk. Something moved just outside the driver's side window. It was too quick to see clearly, but I caught the shadow of it. Tall, wrong in its proportions, like it was standing upright but leaning forward at an impossible angle. My breath caught, and I told myself it had to be a trick of the fog. Still, I locked every door. I sat there for hours, trying to keep calm, but the metallic dragging sound came and went in intervals. Sometimes it circled the RV, sometimes it stayed by the door. Once it tapped on the glass, just 3 slow knocks before retreating into the fog again. By midnight, the air inside smelled faintly of salt water and something else, something sharp and chemical like engine coolant. I checked under the dash, around the vents, but the smell was strongest near the windshield, where the fog kept pressing harder and harder against the glass. It was as if the night itself was leaning in to listen. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke to the sound of the engine trying to turn over. The keys were still in my jacket pocket. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't move, just listened. The ignition cranked once, twice, then stopped, and then I heard it. A voice, low, gurgling like water moving through a clogged pipe, coming from somewhere just outside the RV. I couldn't make out the words, but it was speaking. Pausing. Speaking again. The fog shifted at the edges of the windshield, not from wind, but as if something huge was moving through it. I stayed perfectly still, every muscle locked. The sound of that voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Wet, deliberate, carrying a rhythm that felt almost conversational. It would murmur for a few seconds, stop, and then the silence would stretch just long enough for me to wonder if it was gone. Then it would start again, closer, the tone flattening into something almost impatient. The smell inside was getting worse. The sharp chemical tang had thickened, mixing with the damp salt until it coated my tongue. I felt my stomach lurch, and I pulled my shirt up over my mouth like it might help. The air tasted like a radiator hose left too long in the sun. I gripped my flashlight and inched toward the front of the RV. My boots made almost no sound against the thin carpet, but each step felt like it might be the one to give me away. I reached the driver's seat, crouched low, and angled the flashlight toward the side mirror. Nothing. The fog was so dense it might as well have been a painted wall. Then, tap. Not from the window this time, from the mirror itself. Just a single deliberate flick, like someone was testing its weight. I jerked back instinctively, my elbow hitting the horn. The sound exploded into the night, muffled instantly by the fog, but enough to send my pulse into overdrive. The voice outside stopped. For a long stretch of seconds, nothing happened. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. And then, from somewhere near the front bumper, came the slowest, most deliberate scraping sound I've ever heard. Metal against metal, so faint it felt like it was inside my own head. That was when the fog began to pulse. I know how insane that sounds, but it's the only way to describe it. The wall of gray outside the windshield wasn't static anymore. It moved in slow, swelling waves, as if something enormous was breathing just beyond it. Each time it expanded, the smell of coolant and salt grew stronger. Each time it pulled back, the clicking sound returned. More rapid now, more eager. I thought about turning on the headlights, but my gut screamed no. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to give it a clear view inside. Instead, I backed away from the driver's seat and made for the rear of the RV, where my bed was wedged between two narrow windows. I kept the flashlight off and just crouched there in the dark, trying to control my breathing. It didn't work. The voice returned, but this time it was directly beside the RV, not outside near the ground, up high, level with my windows. It was as if someone was leaning in, their mouth inches from the glass. The gurgling tone dragged at the ends of the sounds, each phrase more distorted than the last. And somewhere beneath that voice was another sound, softer, like a second whisper woven through the first. I couldn't make out a single word, and then silence again. The kind of silence that's so total, your brain starts inventing sounds to fill it. My ears strained for any clue, and that's why I almost didn't notice the faint vibration beneath my feet. At first I thought it was my own trembling, but no, it was coming from below. A steady, faint hum, the kind you get when an engine is just about to turn over. The Winnebago's ignition clicked once, twice, and then stopped. My keys were still in my jacket. I wanted to run, to throw open the door and bolt into the trees, but I kept picturing myself stepping into that fog, feeling it close around me, and something in my gut told me that if I did, I wouldn't find the road again. I might not find anything at all. I don't know how long I sat there before the smell finally began to fade. The clicking stopped. The fog didn't clear, but it settled back into its original stillness, no more pulsing, no more movement at the edges. At some point, I must have passed out from exhaustion, because when I opened my eyes again, the world outside was pale with dawn. The fog was still thick, but daylight had dulled it to a flat, lifeless gray. I couldn't see the ocean, couldn't hear the waves anymore. But the RV started on the first turn of the key. Relief should have hit me like a wave, but it didn't. Because as soon as the engine caught, I realized something. There was no condensation on the inside of the windshield anymore. Every pane of glass, every mirror, every reflective surface inside the RV had been wiped perfectly clean. And written in the thin layer of dust on the dashboard, in tall, uneven letters, were 3 words. Leave before night. I didn't waste a second. I threw the RV into gear and rolled back onto the road, my hands trembling against the steering wheel. The tires crunched over gravel and onto the damp asphalt. The sound strangely loud in the morning stillness. The fog hung low, almost motionless now, but it didn't feel like it was lifting. It just sat there as if it had nowhere else to be. The coastal road wound inland through the redwoods, a ribbon of narrow asphalt swallowed on both sides by towering trunks. I'd driven through forests before, but these felt different. The trees weren't just tall, they were ancient, massive columns holding up the dim sky, and they were close, too close. Some sections narrowed so much that the branches on either side almost touched overhead, blocking what little light there was. I kept my eyes forward, but the rearview mirror caught my attention. The fog hadn't stayed behind. It was following, not like mist drifting on the wind. No, this was deliberate. A low, rolling bank of gray kept pace with me down the road, hugging the bends, never quite closing the gap, but never falling away. I told myself it was just the coastal weather. Fog could linger for miles inland, but every time I rounded a corner, it was there. 20 miles in, I passed a gas station, one of those rural ones with a single pump under a rusting metal awning. A man in a red flannel shirt was filling a jerry can beside an old pickup. I slowed, thinking I'd stop for fuel, maybe get some directions. But the moment he turned his head toward me, I froze. His face was pale, almost colorless, the way a photograph looks after too much sunlight. His eyes were fixed not on me, but on the road behind me. I glanced in the mirror. The fog had stopped at the edge of the trees, sitting there like it was waiting. When I looked back to the man, he was shaking his head. Slowly, deliberately. Then he pointed to the road ahead and mouthed a single word. Go. That was enough. I pressed the gas and didn't look back again until the station was gone from sight. The deeper I drove into the redwoods, the more oppressive the air felt. The temperature hadn't risen with the daylight. It was still cold enough that my breath fogged in the cabin, and the smell, that faint chemical tang, was back. Lighter now, but enough that it clung to the back of my throat. I checked the gauges. Oil pressure fine, coolant fine, engine temperature normal. Nothing to explain it. Yet every few minutes, the scent would surge stronger, as though something outside was brushing against the RV and leaving it behind. Around noon, I reached a turnout with a small sign that read Fern Gulch Trailhead. I needed to stretch my legs, shake off the tension. I parked, grabbed a bottle of water, and stepped outside. The air under the trees was damp and still, thick with the scent of earth and moss. The forest was beautiful in that unsettling way, green so deep it felt unreal, the silence broken only by the faint drip of water from the ferns. But it was the silence that got me. No birds, no insects, nothing moving except the slow sway of leaves high above. I walked just a few yards down the trail, but the moment the road disappeared from sight, my gut tightened. The stillness wasn't peaceful, it was expectant, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a soft metallic click. I turned back toward the RV. The sound came again, slightly faster this time. Click, click, click. It wasn't loud, but in the absence of everything else, it carried like a whisper straight into my ears. When I stepped into the turnout, the road behind me was empty. But the fog was there again, 30, maybe 40 yards away, pooling low over the asphalt. I didn't think. I just ran for the driver's seat and started the engine. This time it hesitated, coughing once before catching. I backed out fast, tires spitting gravel, and merged back onto the road. The fog followed. It didn't matter how fast I drove. It matched my speed exactly, never closing, never falling away. And now I could hear something beneath the engine noise, a faint, wet murmur, like the voice from last night, carried just on the edge of hearing. By the time I reached a small diner on the outskirts of a town called Carrick's Point, my nerves were shot. I pulled in, parked between two dusty sedans, and went inside. The place smelled of coffee and fried onions, the kind of scent that usually means comfort. But the people inside were quiet. Too quiet for lunchtime. Every single one of them turned to look at me when the door closed, and not a single smile met my eyes. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with deep lines around her mouth, came over and poured me a cup before I'd even asked. She didn't write anything down. She just leaned in close enough that I could smell the coffee on her breath and said, "You came from the coast." It wasn't a question. I nodded. Her gaze flicked to the windows, then back to me. "If you want to make it out, you keep driving. Don't stop for anything." Something in her tone told me not to argue. I drained the coffee, left a few bills on the counter, and got back in the RV. When I turned the key, the dashboard lights flickered in a strange rhythm, not the normal cycle. On, off, on, off, like a signal. And somewhere beyond the parking lot, the fog was moving again. I pulled out of Carrick's Point with my hands clamped so tight on the steering wheel, my knuckles hurt. The diner's windows disappeared in the mirrors, and the two-lane road stretched ahead into another tunnel of redwoods. The sky overhead was just a thin ribbon of pale gray, the light weak and directionless. For a while, I told myself the waitress's warning was just local superstition. Coastal towns have their ghost stories, wrecked ships, missing hikers, lights in the fog. But superstition doesn't follow you at exactly the same distance for 50 miles. The fog was closer now. Not much, maybe 10 yards tighter, but I could see it thickening, bunching up around the tree line like it was gathering its weight. Every so often, it would press forward just enough for the tail of it to spill onto the asphalt, and I'd feel the RV shudder beneath me. Not from the road, from the engine. It was subtle at first, a soft hitch in the hum, the kind you feel more than hear. But each time the fog crept closer, the vibration deepened, like the RV was resisting something. Around mile marker 62, I saw a break in the trees, a narrow service road marked with a rusted metal gate. It was chained, but the chain was loose enough that I could probably lift it and drive through. For half a second, I considered it. Maybe I could lose the fog in there, get off the main road, find some back route inland. Then I saw the chain move. It didn't sway in the wind. There was no wind. It lifted slowly as though an invisible hand was testing its weight. Then it dropped, the clink of metal echoing far too loud in the stillness. I pressed the accelerator. The RV groaned, the old engine straining, but I didn't care. I kept going until my eyes stung from staring so hard at the road ahead. Every turn, every stretch of asphalt felt like it could be the last clear mile before the fog overtook me. By late afternoon, the temperature had dropped again. My breath was visible inside the cabin. The heater was on full blast, but the vents only pushed out lukewarm air, and with every mile, the smell of coolant grew sharper. It made my eyes water, burned the back of my throat. I pulled my hoodie up over my nose, but it didn't help. That's when the dashboard lit up. Check engine in dull orange. I swore under my breath and glanced at the gauges. The coolant temperature was fine. Oil pressure fine. But the battery meter had dipped just a fraction below normal. Another mile and it dropped further. The headlights flickered, not in the usual dimming way, but in a slow, rhythmic pulse. On, off, on, off. Exactly like the dashboard had done at the diner. My heart started hammering. This wasn't a mechanical fault. Something was in the electrical system, something that wanted to be there. At the next pull-off, a gravel loop with a battered picnic table, I coasted in and killed the engine. The sudden silence made my ears ring. The fog had stopped at the entrance to the turnout, just like it had at the gas station, as if it couldn't or wouldn't cross onto the gravel. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd found its limit. Maybe it couldn't follow everywhere. But then I heard it. Click. It came from beneath the RV, a single, deliberate tap against the undercarriage. Then another. Then a faint scraping sound, moving from the front axle toward the rear. I grabbed the flashlight and leaned out the driver's side window. I couldn't see under the RV from this angle, but the beam caught something strange on the gravel near the rear tire, a thin trail of moisture beading into droplets. It wasn't oil. It wasn't coolant. It was clearer, thicker, clinging to the stones like glue. The scraping stopped. I pulled my head back inside and locked the doors, though I knew that wouldn't mean much if whatever this was could kill an engine from the outside. For a long time, nothing happened. I sat there, staring at the fog just beyond the turnout entrance. It shifted once or twice, not like wind, but in slow swells, as if something inside it was pacing. Then, from somewhere beneath the RV, came the sound of the starter motor cranking. The keys were still in my pocket. I bolted for the ignition and slammed them in, turning it before I could think. The engine roared to life under my control, and I floored it, shooting out of the turnout so fast the tires spit gravel into the trees. In the mirror, the fog poured onto the asphalt after me. No hesitation this time. And over the roar of the engine, over the pounding of my own heartbeat, I swear I heard it. That low, wet murmur, now steady, now closer, riding just beneath the sound of the motor like a second, unwanted rhythm. I kept my foot pressed hard on the accelerator, the RV shuddering as the speedometer climbed higher than I usually dared take it on a winding two-lane. The redwoods whipped past on either side, their trunks blurring into a dark, unbroken wall. I could feel the old suspension fighting each curve, the tires gripping the wet asphalt by sheer luck. The fog was no longer keeping its distance. In the mirror, it surged forward in rolling masses, not drifting anymore, but advancing, pushing down the road like a tide that knew exactly where it wanted to go. I could see the line where it met the air, a strange rippling seam that shimmered in the fading daylight. The battery gauge dipped again. Then the headlights gave a slow, uneven flicker. Off, on, off, on, off. My stomach twisted. It was draining me, literally feeding off the RV's power, every electrical pulse stolen to pull itself closer. Then the first failure hit. The radio off, the hum of the cabin fans gone. The dash lights dimmed until I could barely see the gauges. My phone, plugged into the charger, went black. The engine still ran, but it felt heavier, like I was hauling an invisible weight behind me. Around the next bend, the road began to climb, the asphalt narrowing and curling around a steep hillside. I pressed the accelerator, but the RV groaned in protest. The speedometer dropped, 50, 45, 40. The fog gained. I could see it now in my side mirrors, rolling up along the embankments, spilling down from the treetops, faster than it should have been able to move. Each time it closed the gap, the engine would sputter, coughing like it was gasping for air. And then, without warning, every gauge on the dash pinned itself to 0. The engine didn't cut out, not entirely, but the power steering went dead. The wheel turned into a stone in my hands, and I fought to keep the RV straight as I crawled around the bend. That's when I saw the sign. Rest area. 1 mile. 1 mile might as well have been 10. The steering fought me at every turn, the brake pedal sluggish under my foot. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel so hard, but I didn't dare let up. The fog was practically at my bumper now, the seam between it and the air pulsing in quick, hungry waves. I could hear it through the metal shell of the RV, a wet, dragging hiss that rose and fell like breathing. 1/2 mile. I could see the outline of the rest area's lights through the trees, a faint orange glow, hazy but solid. Then the second failure hit. The headlights went black. The road ahead vanished into gray. I leaned forward, eyes straining, guiding the RV by muscle memory alone. The faint edge of asphalt under the right tires, the only clue I had that I was still on the road. The orange glow ahead wavered, as though the fog itself was swallowing the light. The engine sputtered again, harder this time. I slammed my foot down. The RPM surged, but there was no corresponding push, just a grinding strain that made the whole chassis vibrate. 1/4 mile. I could see the entrance now, a narrow pull-in loop with a few empty parking spots and a row of picnic tables under a flickering street lamp. The fog lunged. It wasn't a slow creep anymore. It rolled forward in a single violent surge, swallowing the tail of the RV. The moment it touched, the motor screamed like it had been strangled, and the speedometer dropped into the 30s. I didn't think. I just aimed for the brightest patch of light I could see and floored it. The RV burst into the rest area, tires squealing on the wet pavement. The moment I crossed under the street lamp, the fog stopped. Dead. It curled along the edge of the light, writhing like smoke trapped under glass, but it didn't cross. The engine idled, rough and uneven. The gauges slowly climbed back to normal. The lights came on. The radio hummed back to life with a burst of static. And then, from the dark just beyond the lamplight, I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Metal on metal. The same sound from my first night. Only this time it came from the inside of the RV. For a second, I couldn't move. The sound echoed through the cabin in a way that made it impossible to tell where it had started. Just 3 sharp, deliberate knocks against metal. Not a creak, not a rattle from the frame. Someone, something, had just touched the inside of my RV. I spun in place, scanning every surface. The kitchenette, the storage compartments, the closet door near the bed. Everything looked the same as it had a minute ago, but the air felt different, heavier, like I'd stepped into a sealed box. I gripped the flashlight and crept toward the rear. My boots made the softest thud on the linoleum, but each step felt like it landed too loud, giving away my position. The bed was undisturbed. Cabinets closed. Bathroom door cracked open just enough to show the pale square of the sink in the dark. I nudged it open with the flashlight beam. Empty. Then, another knock. From the front. It was playing with me. Moving when I moved, keeping just far enough ahead that I could never catch it. I backed toward the driver's seat, my eyes darting between every shadow. The fog still ringed the rest area, unmoving now, a wall of pale nothingness pressed against the edge of the light. But I realized something. There wasn't a single other vehicle here. No trucks, no cars, no late-night travelers. Just me, the lamplight, and the thing outside, or inside. I sat in the driver's seat, my hand resting on the ignition when I heard the third knock. Not from the front this time, not from the back, from beneath. It was subtle, almost polite. 1, 2, 3. And right after the third, the engine coughed, a short, choking sputter like someone had pinched its air supply. I twisted the key. The engine turned over, rough at first, then steadied. But the coolant smell rushed in through the vents like a living thing. It burned my sinuses, made my eyes water. I cranked the heater off, but the air kept coming. My skin prickled. It wasn't just air. Something was breathing through the vents. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own boots, and yanked open the undersink cabinet where the ducting ran. The flashlight beam caught a glisten of moisture along the inside of the vent pipe, thick, clear drops, the same as what I'd seen under the RV back at the turnout. And in that beam, for just a fraction of a second, something shifted inside the duct. A ripple, like muscle under skin. The engine coughed again, louder this time, and the lights overhead flickered so hard the cabin plunged into darkness between pulses. I didn't want to be here when they went out completely. I lunged for the driver's seat, slammed the RV into gear, and floored it toward the exit. The fog didn't hesitate this time. It parted, letting me through like it wanted me back on the road. As I merged onto the highway, the headlights cut through maybe 20 feet before hitting the rolling wall of gray ahead. The rest area's lamplight shrank in the mirrors until it was swallowed completely. The engine hummed steady for a mile. 2. I almost let myself believe I'd shaken it. Then the voice started again. Low, wet, patient, coming from somewhere deep inside the dash. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the fan motor, old bearings grinding in the cold. But the sound had rhythm. It breathed. It lingered on certain notes, like a voice drawing out words it didn't want me to understand. Every few seconds it would pause, as though listening for my reaction, then begin again. Lower, wetter, closer. The fog ahead thickened until it became a living wall. I slowed, headlights cutting no more than 10 feet into it. The edges moved in slow pulses, curling inward, as if it were inhaling. My hands were slick on the wheel. Then the first jolt hit. The entire RV lurched sideways, suspension groaning. I thought I'd clipped something in the road, but there was no impact sound, just that deep, wet thud, like something heavy had slammed against the undercarriage from below. The engine stammered. My stomach dropped. I pressed the accelerator, but the response was sluggish, like I was dragging an anchor. My mind jumped to the possibility that something was under me, latched on. I pictured limbs hooking into the chassis, a mouth pressed against the vent system, drawing in more than just air. The second jolt came harder, throwing me toward the window. The steering wheel yanked to the right, fighting my grip. I wrestled it straight again, my pulse hammering so loud it almost drowned out the hiss that rose through the vents, and then the windshield fogged over from the inside. Not from my breath. It was too fast, too thick, blooming outward in pale white bursts until I couldn't see the road at all. I flicked the wipers instinctively, but they scraped uselessly across dry glass. This wasn't condensation. It was inside the laminate, bleeding through from somewhere it had no business being. I flicked the defroster on high. Bad idea. The moment the fans roared, the voice surged, no longer murmuring, but pressing syllables against the ductwork like it wanted them inside me. It was the same low gurgle I'd heard that first night, but now it had weight. Each sound vibrating in my chest, pressing on my ribs. The fog outside surged forward, folding over the RV. I felt the air pressure shift, the weight of it settling into the frame. The lights dimmed again. That's when I realized the truth. It didn't want to stop the RV. It wanted to take me with it. The engine was just the leash. Up ahead, the road forked, left toward a sign I couldn't read in the dim light, right toward a narrow, unmarked trail road. My gut screamed not to take the trail, but the main road ahead was already being swallowed whole. The seam between air and fog snapped shut in seconds. The kind of closure that didn't leave room for headlights, let alone me. I swerved right. The trail road was little more than a strip of gravel through tight redwood trunks. The branches overhead knotted together so thick the fog couldn't drop straight down. It moved along the ground instead. A slow, creeping tide that chased my rear wheels. I kept pushing forward, but the battery gauge was in free fall now. 20 seconds later, the dash went dead again. The only light left came from the dim glow of the flashlight rolling on the passenger seat, its beam swinging wildly with every bump. Then came the sound. Not from the vents this time, not from beneath. It was inside, moving from the back of the RV toward the front, slow, deliberate, like something dragging itself along the floor. I knew if I stayed, it would reach me before the engine gave its last breath, and if I got out, I'd be on foot in the dark, with nothing but that fog waiting to close in. The next bend revealed something. An old service cabin just off the trail, its roof sagging, door hanging open. No lights, no signs of life. I had seconds to decide. I didn't remember cutting the engine, but when my boots hit the gravel, the RV was already silent, its final cough swallowed by the fog. The door slammed behind me on its own, the sound ringing too loud in the stillness. The service cabin was only 30 feet away, but each step felt stretched, like the space between was folding in on itself. The air was thick enough to taste now, metallic, almost coppery, like blood that had been sitting in your mouth too long. The open door groaned as I pushed inside. The smell hit first, mildew, old wood rot, and something sweet underneath that didn't belong. I flicked the flashlight toward the corners, and the beam caught dust drifting in slow spirals, as though the air itself were moving with intent. The place was one room, a cracked linoleum floor, a warped counter with rusted sink, 2 overturned chairs. The walls were warped and damp to the touch, but the strangest thing was the windows. Every single pane was fogged over from the outside, not the cold, not the weather. Just that same creeping white clinging to the glass like it wanted in. I shut the door and wedged a chair under the knob. The wood creaked but held. Then came the tapping. It started at the far left window, soft at first, just a fingertip against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I swung the light toward it, but the fog outside was too dense to see anything beyond the pane. The tapping moved, sliding along the wall, window to window, circling. I didn't move, not even to breathe. And then, from the direction of the RV, a sound I couldn't mistake, the driver's side door opening. I knew I'd closed it. I'd heard it slam. The metallic click of the latch was followed by a shift in the fog. Through the glass, I saw movement, something taller than a man, blurred by the mist, stooping to peer inside the RV. It stayed there for a long time, its head tilting as if it could see through the metal walls. Then it turned toward the cabin. The tapping stopped. A new sound began, low, steady, almost like engine idling. But it wasn't mechanical. It was too wet, too irregular. It pulsed in sync with the shifting fog at the edges of the window panes. The chair under the knob rattled once. Twice. The air pressure changed, so sudden my ears popped. The sweet smell intensified until it was all I could taste. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then flared so bright it hurt my eyes before going out completely. In the dark, I felt it, not a touch, more like a pull from somewhere behind my ribs, as if something outside was trying to draw me through the walls. My hands dug into the counter to anchor myself, splinters biting deep into my palms. The door groaned under the weight pressing against it. The wood fibers began to snap. And then, from deep within the fog outside came a voice. Not from the vents, not from the glass, just hanging in the air like it had always been there, waiting. Engines stop, hearts start. The chair gave way. The door swung inward, slow at first, then faster as if something beyond it had lost patience. I stumbled backward, the flashlight useless in my hand, my heel catching on the edge of the linoleum. The fog rolled in, not drifting but pouring, like it was under pressure and had been waiting for the smallest gap to force itself through. It wrapped around my ankles, climbing, thicker than smoke, heavy enough to feel its weight. The voice came again, closer now, though I couldn't pinpoint a direction. "Engines stop," Hearts start. My pulse slammed in my ears. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go except back outside. Into it. Something moved in the fog inside the cabin. Not just a shadow, this was shape. Tall, with an uneven gait, as if each leg had to remember how to work before the next step. The outline sharpened, but not in a way I could name. It was like my brain couldn't fully agree on what I was looking at. One moment a man, the next a column of twisting vapor, then something else. It stopped 3 feet from me. Close enough that the sweet metal taste grew overpowering, coating my tongue like syrup. I realized I wasn't breathing, because I couldn't. The air was too thick. The thing lifted what could have been a hand. My chest seized, heat crawling up my spine. And then, just before it touched me, it tilted its head in that same unnatural way I'd seen outside the RV. It spoke again, softer, almost tender. "You're not ready." The fog around its body rippled like wind moving through wheat, and it stepped backward into the doorway, into the thicker white beyond. As soon as it crossed the threshold, the pull in my chest released, and I gasped like I'd been underwater. I staggered forward, slamming the cabin door shut again, my whole body shaking so hard the chair I jammed under the knob rattled against the floor. But the fog didn't leave. It pressed against the windows, curling in slow, deliberate patterns, circles, spirals, shapes that made my stomach twist. And through it all, that wet, uneven engine sound throbbed, steady as a heartbeat. I stayed like that for hours, or maybe minutes. Time didn't work right in that place. The flashlight finally coughed back to life, its beam weak and jittery, but enough to check the windows again. That's when I saw it. Through the fog on the far window, a handprint. Not smeared, not sliding. Just there, larger than mine by at least half, the fingers too long, the palm too narrow, and inside the print, pressed into the moisture, was something darker. A residue, faint but unmistakable, like oil or ash. The moment my light touched it, the heartbeat sound stopped. The silence was worse, because in that stillness I heard something else. Small, sharp, and familiar. The sound of my RV's engine turning over, only I hadn't touched it. The sound of my RV's engine cranking cut through the stillness like a lifeline I wasn't sure I trusted. It sputtered, choked, then caught, idling in that low, uneven thrum that felt more like a growl than machinery. For a moment, I didn't move. I was terrified that if I opened the cabin door, the fog would surge in and bury me. But the thought of someone or something inside my RV was worse. That was my only way out of here. I yanked the chair away from the door, my breath loud in the small space, and flung it open. The fog didn't rush in this time. It just hung there, dense and waiting, swirling slowly as if aware of me. I pulled my jacket tighter, held the flashlight like a weapon, and stepped outside. The sound of the engine guided me, though visibility was no more than a few feet. My boots sank into damp earth, the smell of salt water, and something faintly metallic coating my throat. The closer I got, the more the fog seemed to pulse in time with the idle, like it was breathing along with the RV. Then I saw it. The driver's side door hung open. My interior lights glowed warm against the cold haze, but the moment I stepped inside, the air was wrong, stagnant, heavier than it should have been. The engine was running, but the keys were still in my pocket. I froze, hand instinctively checking my jacket. The metal was cold against my fingertips, too real to be a mistake. My heart thudded in my ears as I reached toward the ignition. The instant I touched the steering wheel, the idle cut out. The engine didn't fade. It stopped, dead. And in the absence of sound, I heard a whisper, so close it brushed my ear. "You're almost ready." I spun, sweeping the flashlight through the RV. The beam caught on the narrow hallway leading to the bed, and for half a second I saw it. A shape at the far end, bent too low to be human, arms long enough to brush both walls at once. The light flickered, and it was gone. I didn't wait. I slammed the door shut, twisting the lock with trembling hands. But as I turned back toward the driver's seat, I realized the windshield wasn't just fogged. It was thick with it, pressing inward like a living thing, pulsing in slow, deliberate beats. I thought about turning the key, about forcing the engine to life, but a sick, cold certainty rooted me to the spot. Whatever this fog was, it didn't just kill engines, it fed on them. And right now, it was waiting for me to try. Outside, something tapped on the glass. Once, twice, then a slow, dragging scrape that followed the curve of the windshield, like a fingertip tracing the outline of my only escape. The scrape along the windshield didn't stop. It looped, slow and methodical, like whoever or whatever was out there was learning the shape of the RV by touch alone. I stood frozen in the narrow space between the seats, my flashlight trembling in my grip, the beam jittering over the dash. That sound had a weight to it. It wasn't the casual curiosity of an animal. It was deliberate, measured, patient. The fog outside swirled in soft, hypnotic spirals, and I realized the scraping wasn't muffled by glass the way it should have been. It was too clear, like the sound was inside my head instead of outside my RV. I backed toward the kitchenette, my boots squeaking against the vinyl floor, the kind of tiny sound that felt deafening in the suffocating silence. My hand brushed the counter, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I didn't even remember stepping that far back. Something shifted in the bedroom. It wasn't loud, just the faintest weight settling into the mattress. But I knew my bed had been empty. I wanted to tell myself it was the RV adjusting on uneven ground, that all of this could be explained. But that quiet voice in the back of my mind, the one I'd been ignoring since the first moment the fog rolled in, kept whispering, "You've felt this before." I took one step toward the bedroom, and the air grew warmer. Not a comforting kind of warmth. This was close, humid, the kind that comes from someone exhaling just inches from your skin. The smell hit me next. Salt, sure, but under it, there was something rotten. It reminded me of when I was a kid and found a dead bird behind my dad's shed in Oregon, its body just beginning to sink into the soil. I shone the flashlight down the hallway. The beam stopped at the foot of the bed. Something was crouched there. It didn't move when the light hit it. I couldn't make out its face, if it had one. But I could see its arms, long and pale, bent at impossible angles, fingers curling into the carpet like they were burrowing. The worst part wasn't that it was there. The worst part was the way the fog outside the windows moved with it, like a tether stretching from the glass to the shape in my bedroom. And then, like it had been waiting for me to notice, the figure tilted its head, slow enough to make my stomach knot, and whispered the same words I'd heard in the driver's seat. "You're almost ready." I didn't wait to hear another word. I lunged for the door, yanking it open into a wall of wet, blinding fog. My flashlight beam was useless, just a pale glow swallowed whole a foot from the lens. But I could hear it in the fog. Footsteps that weren't quite footsteps, coming from every direction at once. The ground beneath me vibrated, faint at first, then harder, like the earth itself was breathing under my boots. The RV's engine roared to life behind me on its own. Headlights cut through the fog in two pale spears, but they didn't reach anything. Just more white, more shifting shapes. I turned back and my stomach dropped. Something was inside the RV now, filling it wall to wall. Not with a body, there was no body, but with a pressure like the air had become thick muscle and sinew. The cupboards bulged. The blinds stretched inward. The voice came again, everywhere at once. "Engines die here. People stay." The headlights flickered, then the engine sputtered and coughed. The fog pressed tighter against the doorway, creeping inside, wrapping around my ankles like cold fingers. I ran. I didn't care where, just forward, deeper into the unseen. But every step I took heard another set of steps match mine exactly. And then I realized it wasn't chasing me. It was leading me. I stopped running, not because I wanted to, but because the fog had thickened into something with weight. It clung to my chest, pressing the air out of me. My legs burned, my pulse roared in my ears, and then silence. The matching footsteps stopped, the ground stopped humming. Through the fog, something glowed ahead. Not bright, not warm, just a pale greenish shimmer, birdied like moonlight filtered through seawater. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. I stepped toward it, every instinct screaming no, but the air loosened just enough to let me breathe again. When I got close enough to see its shape, I understood. It wasn't a light. It was a hole. a tear in the fog itself, swirling, alive, rimmed with strands that pulsed like veins. Inside, I saw shadows of RVs, cars, and people, just standing still, not dead, not alive, waiting. The voice came low this time, almost tender. You broke the engine's trust. Step in, and the fog will hold you safe forever. Safe. Forever. I took one step forward, then stopped. That's when I heard something faint behind me. A cough. An engine turning over. My RV. I spun and ran toward it without looking back. The ground shifted under me like I was running across the deck of a ship, but somehow I found the steps, the handle, the seat. I slammed the door, turned the key. The engine caught, ragged, furious, but alive. The fog didn't retreat. It rose higher, swallowing the windshield, tapping against the glass like rain that wasn't rain. But I kept the pedal down. By the time I hit the coastal highway, the rearview mirror was pure white. I didn't slow down until the sun rose hours later, and even then, I never looked back. I never went back to the redwoods. Because I know now, it's not the cliffs, the trees, or the storms you should be afraid of out there. It's the fog, and the things it decides to keep.